Daddy.
Huh? Let's go.
The adventures in the Orre region continue in my conceptual third game for fan-favorite spin-offs, Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, with a brand new story and cast of characters within an expanded version of the Orre region, with even more Shadow Pokemon, including mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon based on the 7 Deadly Sins. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to show your boy some love and hit that like button, leave a comment down below to let me know what you think, and most importantly, please subscribe to my channel so I can keep it growing. As most of you know by now, while the concepts and designs featured on my channel are all my own, I don't actually draw the artwork featured in my videos, as I have commissioned over 40 talented artists who I work with intimately throughout the creative process, down to the tiniest of details, to help bring my ideas to life just as I imagine them, so I can take you on these exciting journeys through my imagination. So please make sure to go follow and support all of them as well. And for this project, I actually worked with a smaller circle of artists than I normally do, as I wanted to try to branch out a little and feature some artists I haven't really had the chance to yet, all of which did a phenomenal job, so please make sure to go support all of them. Their links will be provided down below in the description. So without further ado, let's take a look at this hypothetical game taking place in a reimagined version of the Orre region. For those of you who don't know, the Orre region is an arid region said to have been inspired by Phoenix, Arizona, with some technologically advanced elements added into the region's locations and character designs. So I tried my best to honor all of that, while also expanding upon it using even more locations from Arizona as inspiration for a lot of these new areas to help make the region and its Pokemon species feel even more diverse. Since those games were released all the way back in Gen 3, I'll also be bringing Pokemon I feel fit the aesthetics of the region from generations 4 through 9, as well as Pokemon from my own Fakemon regions, as this hypothetical game would exist within my shared Fakemon universe, as there'll be plenty of crossovers and connections between this region and all of my own, including one of the main characters featured in this game. Let's start with the new protagonist of this hypothetical game, Zion. Zion is a mysterious Pokemon trainer. Even they are constantly trying to uncover more about their hazy past. Calm and collected, Zion is always analyzing the best course of action for any problems that may arise. Accompanied by their partner Pokemon and best friends, the nurturing Mummion and Ghost-type evolution from my first Fakemon region, the Luika region, and the spunky Dragon-type evolution, Drekion, from my second Fakemon region, the Fearon region. Both are formidable battlers, perfectly in sync with Zion and one another. While they are each hesitant of strangers at first, they love to cuddle up by a warm fire with their master. Zion is not only an expert Pokemon trainer, but analyst, if not the best in the scientific Coliseum of Shadow Pokémon. If you couldn't tell by now, Zion even has their own Aura Reader and Snag Machine to help capture Shadow Pokémon, earning them the title Shadow Slayer, and a title they will earn with the resurgence of Shadow Pokémon in the Orre region as a meteorite crashed down on the region, as you saw in the opening, unleashing a foreign virus onto the land. In the previous games and even in the context of this game, until now, Shadow Pokémon were thought to be created artificially through the Cypher Corporation's inhuman experiments on Pokémon, closing their hearts, so they could commit heinous acts. However, I decided to explain the origins of these experiments and the creation of Shadow Pokémon by explaining these horrible experiments were only possible using small remains of the same dark substance found on this meteorite, found before the events of the first 2 games. A dangerous substance that is far more abundant and potent than ever on this meteorite, even mutating some Pokemon to the point they can no longer be purified through normal means. It is up to you, aka Zion, to stop these sinister Shadow Pokemon and the spread of the soul-eating virus before it's too late. The game starts at a massive crash site known as the Cosmic Crater, inspired by a real crater in Arizona known as Meteor Crater. Sensing all the immense shadow energy using their aura reader, Zion goes to investigate, as you saw in the opening. Now, unlike the previous games in this series, you'd be able to see and encounter wild Pokemon in the overworld like the more recent games. However, like the previous games in this series, you can only capture Shadow Pokémon, as that's what the plot revolves around, as you're trying to stop the spread of this virus. So while you would see non-Shadow Pokémon in the overworld, they'd be more decorative, but don't worry, you'd still encounter plenty of wild Shadow Pokémon, as this virus is spreading like a wildfire. And for those of you who never played Pokemon Coliseum or Gale of Darkness, you can catch other trainers' Pokemon as long as it's a Shadow Pokemon. That would be no different in this game. That's actually where the name Snag Machine comes from, as it was created by now dismantled group Team Snag'em. But since Shadow Pokemon can now be created organically thanks to this virus, you'd also be able to use it to capture Shadow Pokemon in the wild as well, because previously, Shadow Pokemon being man-made and used for such criminal acts were only used by trainers and weren't found in the wild, and obviously this meteorite changes everything. Speaking of which, back to Cosmic Crater, while exploring this site, you'd encounter some cosmic-themed wild Pokemon that you'd have to battle, all orbiting the meteorite in which they appear to have arrived with. After making your way to the center of the crater, where the meteorite is found, you'd be approached by an awkward and talkative girl named Namid and her Elgem. Namid is of Native American, or I guess Native Orinian descent, as I really wanted to expand upon the Orre region's lure, as it is inspired by Phoenix, Arizona, and the West in general, which obviously has a big Native American population and history, and it's a group that I feel is underrepresented in Pokemon. In fact, I don't think I can think of any Native American-inspired characters off the top of my head, not saying they don't exist, so I really wanted to explore that a little bit more to flesh out this region and make it feel even more unique. Namid is obsessed with space and Ultra Beasts ever since first encountering her Elgem out in the desert years ago, as it helped inspire her to look to the stars as she wanted to learn more about Pokemon from outer space or other dimensions. Hence all the references to Ultra Beasts snuck into her quirky design. Having spotted this meteor months ago through her telescope, she has been waiting for this moment, hoping to be the first to explore this crater and study the meteorite. Part of her even seems to think an Ultra Beast may have arrived on it, as she sees a lot of other Pokemon from space have arrived with it. Zion, however, in a monotone matter-of-fact way, tells her that Ultra Beasts come from Ultra Wormholes, not meteorites. Stuttering in embarrassment, saying of course she knows that, but before she can finish you hear a loud explosion from the meteorite as Shadow Deoxys comes flying out of the debris, scaring Namid as she falls to the ground shaking with fear. Zion, reading the astronomical shadow energy radiating off of the Shadow Pokemon, is ready to battle, and you do exactly that, as Shadow Deoxys in its original form would act as the game's first boss and the tutorial to its new mechanics, which would pretty much be the same for this game as in the previous games, with just some slight minor changes to kind of spice things up and fit the more modern mechanics of the newer games. The boss battles in this game, however, against all the Shadow Pokemon would be 2 versus 1, and similar to the boss battles in Legends Arceus, where they were more like an action RPG, and you'd have to dodge the opposing Pokemon's attacks, and you could even faint outside of the turn-based style battles. The biggest difference being the boss battles within this game would be far more cinematic than anything we've ever seen in Pokemon before, with action commands added in to shake things up and initiate the traditional turn-based style sections of battle, once again being 2 versus 1, at least for these big boss battles. Another difference is, rather than throwing bombs to weaken your foe outside of the turn-based style sections, your 2 Pokemon, in this case being Mummion and Drekion, would auto-attack only if they are in a distance from the opponent, akin to the mechanics in Xenoblade Chronicles, for those of you familiar with that series. But once again, you don't have to do this. You could still win by just doing the auto command into the turn-based style sections, but this is an additional way to win and just adds more depth to the battles, as I feel the turn-based style has gotten kind of stagnant, and I really appreciated these changes to Pokemon Legends Arceus, if you couldn't tell by now, which most of you who follow my channel probably can. But that being said, it's still nowhere near as RPG style as the Forge Form weapons are mechanic, but it's a step in the right direction. As I previously mentioned, all the Shadow Warp Pokemon you face in the boss battles are meant to represent one of the 7 deadly sins, with Deoxys being the outlier, but still representing a sin, if not what many people believe to be the most unforgivable of the sins, despair, being the complete loss or absence of hope, as that's what this Pokemon's presence in the Orre region represents, as it carries this dark contagion with it. It's also important to note that you will face off against Shadow Deoxys multiple times throughout Pokemon Descent of Darkness, each time being in a new form. So each boss battle against Shadow Deoxys will be drastically different. Speaking of which, all of the Shadow Warp Pokemon you face in these intense Pokemon Legends Arceus-inspired boss battles not only look different, but have beefed up stats and a signature Shadow move after mutating. Now, it's important to note that Shadow Pokemon keep their original typings, and Shadow isn't a type in that sense. But in the previous games, there were Shadow moves, which can only be learnt by Shadow Pokemon. But once again, since Shadow isn't a type, these moves, as powerful as they are, cannot receive Stab. That being said, Shadow moves are super effective on any non-Shadow Pokemon, which is even better if you ask me, but the trade-off is Shadow moves aren't very effective on other Shadow Pokemon. So any Shadow Pokemon you snag on your adventure will definitely come in handy in these boss battles against the Shadow Warp Pokemon. Now, in Pokemon Gale of Darkness, Shadow moves had unlimited PP, but given the current state of the Pokemon meta, and that this game would have online features, unlike the previous games, I decided to retcon that in this game, so they weren't too OP. Speaking of OP, Shadow Deoxys' signature move, Shadow Shower, is essentially a Shadow version of Draco Meteor, as it summons a bunch of Shadow Meteors down from the sky, similar to the one it landed in, dealing a massive amount of damage. And given the mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon, unlike your typical Shadow Pokemon, also have elevated stats, Shadow Deoxys has a whopping 690 as its base stats. Not that far off from most mascot legendary Pokemon's base stats, as that's essentially what this is, and the same exact stats as Eternatus. But fear not, despite being the very first boss battle, these insane stats don't really matter, as this is just a tutorial, so you are pretty much guaranteed to win. So outside the normal turn-based sections of this battle tutorial, teaching you the same mechanics I'm sure every Pokemon fan knows by heart by now, in the overworld sections of this tutorial, you'll learn how your Mummion and Draceon's auto attacks work. You'll also learn how to dodge, as you evade a series of comets falling from the sky in succession, and you'll even learn how to use the action commands in response to an attack where Deoxys extends its DNA strand arms out into a fist to punch you from far distances. So if you hit the action button in time, it will trigger a cinematic cutscene where both Mummion and Draceon block the fist before it hits you. Then Mummion, using the bandage drapings on its head, squeezing tightly, holding Deoxys' extended arm in place so Draceon can run up it, and they will both attack Deoxys together, as Mummion will launch a Shadow Ball attack on the restrained Deoxys at the same exact time. Draceon will use a Dragon Claw head-on right on Deoxys' face. This will automatically end the battle no matter what HP Deoxys has at the time, as Deoxys is clearly irritated. After defeating Shadow Deoxys, it would fly off, and Namid is absolutely impressed by your skills, and kind of talking your ear off as you continue to analyze the crater and its shadow energy, which is unlike anything you've ever seen before. This is when Zion, shocked, reveals to Namid that they've never seen a Shadow Pokemon in the wild or organically made like this before, giving a little exposition into how Shadow Pokemon were artificially created for new players as they explain it to Namid. They are also alarmed as the wild Pokemon in this area make it clear that this virus is starting to spread rapidly, and right after Zion says this, Namid's Elgem starts to become infected and lunges at her. But Mummion is able to use its bandages to wrap it up and stop it before it can hurt her, as Zion uses their Snag Machine to capture it, assuring Namid that they promise to purify it for her. Namid is really worried about her Elgem, but also fascinated by everything and offers to help you, but you say you work alone, before having what appears to be a glitchy flashback of Wes and Rui laughing together in Phoenix City in the first game. You then snap out of it, and Namid asks you if you're okay. Mummion and Draceon seem worried about you too, as they each go rub up against one of your legs to comfort you. Namid then promises to be of use, saying her father is extremely successful and wealthy, running an entire company, the Totem Corporation, which honors the past and Ori's rich history in innovative ways to help build towards a brighter future. Found in the bustling metropolis of Neo Aqueni, which is the largest and most technologically advanced city in the Orre region, built right beside the original Aqueni village Namid and her father's ancestors once called home. And this of course is a brand new location I added to the region, once again to help expand its lore, and help give some Native American representation. While her father is a very busy man and workaholic running this massive tech company, everything he does is for his family, and he loves to spoil his daughter. That's how she manages to get a lot of her tech. She says maybe he'll be able to use his resources to even help you find out more about this meteorite and stop the spread of this foreign virus. Hesitant, Zion agrees to allow her to help only if she's careful and doesn't talk too much. Without hesitation, she instantly says yes, until she hears the less talking part, but says she can't make any promises on that end, but she will try. Mummion chuckles at this, but Drekion and Zion don't seem amused. So if you couldn't tell by now, Namid is sort of the companion and comic relief of this game to help balance Zion's more stoic personality. Namid asks where they're off to next, and Zion replies Phoenix City, the location they just saw in their flashback. Namid asks what's in Phoenix City, and they say an old friend. Namid is confused though and says, "I thought you said you had no friends." But Zion continues on without her. Now, Phoenix City is an iconic location from the first two games. It's a gorgeous, oasis-like city in the middle of the desert of the southeast of Orre. While expanded a little and now overflowing with more wild Pokemon, flourishing in its oasis-like setting, this location is pretty much the same for the most part, as it didn't change that much between the last two games. Here you'll encounter the companion from the first game, Pokemon Coliseum, Rui. Rui is determined, caring, and brave, but can be a bit bossy and even stubborn at times. She has psychic abilities that allow her to detect Shadow Pokémon without needing an Aura Reader, which the hero of the first game, Wes, used to his advantage. Because of this, despite not having any Pokemon previously, I decided to give Rui some Pokemon, including a partner Pokemon in the form of a rambunctious Riolu named Rhea. This Riolu would try to pick a fight with both Mummion and Drekion when first meeting them, despite being smaller than them both and outnumbered, quickly put in its place as you'd actually have to battle her using Amuna and her Riolu, as she doesn't seem too happy to see you. Both Rui and Wes are from Pokemon Coliseum and were missing in the sequel Gale of Darkness, so I try to offer my own in-game reasoning to why that is, some of which Rui will even allude to when you first encounter her, as she seems surprised to see Zion, almost as if she recognizes them. So naturally Zion will ask if they've met before, and she says not quite, but she knows exactly who they are, the Shadow Slayer. Namid is confused by this interaction, trying to crack a joke to lower the tension, but no one seems to appreciate it. Zion then goes on to tell her that Shadow Pokemon have returned. Since this game is about a year and a half, maybe 2 years after the last game, and since Shadow Pokemon were thought to be artificially made by the Cypher Corporation until now, and this organization was seemingly dismantled at the end of the last game, it only makes sense now that Shadow Pokemon haven't been seen in the Orre region for a while now. So Rui says this can't be, but to prove your case, you let Namid's infected Shadow Elgyem out of its snack ball. Able to read its Shadow Aura, she is shocked, and asks how this is possible. Namid, excited, steps in and gives her her own exaggerated and abbreviated version of these events with the Meteor and Shadow Deoxys. Rui, somehow following this, is shocked to hear Shadow Pokemon can now be infected organically and in the wild nonetheless. She asks what she can do to help, and you say you know she had a friend, implying Wes, who you also saw in your little flashback. Rui then replies, "Wes. Yeah, he isn't my friend, not anymore," as if she doesn't want to talk about it. Zion then says he's seen him before, and says he stopped the Shadow Pokemon, right? And she says that's correct, he did, but he isn't the only one. She tells you to stop by Professor Crane's Pokemon HQ lab, found in the northwest of the region, and when you get there to ask for a young boy named Michael, the hero of the second game, saying if that's a hero you're looking for, he's the one you should seek. Zion thanks her. She then says if Shadow Pokemon have returned, it's only a matter of time until the criminals within the region find out and try to use them to their advantage like they have in the past. This means groups like Team Snag'em or Cypher could resurface, which wouldn't be good. Rui then says before you do anything, you should stop by the underground city beneath Pyrite Town called the Under. If you're looking for any kind of word of these types of criminals, and what they have planned with the Shadow Pokemon, or even if they know about this resurgence, that this would be the place to go, but to be careful. Namid then chimes in saying she thought the Under was destroyed, referring to the end of the first game, as this location wasn't accessible in the second, but she then says that's what the criminals wanted these people to think, so they could rebuild and have their own underground city to carry on illegal activity once again. Namid then says she will sit this one out, as she doesn't want to get into that kind of trouble, and Zion agrees that's for the best. Rui then offers Namid to stay here with her, so she can help purify her Elgem, and Namid obviously seems to like this idea. Now, unlike the last games, this game would be open world for you to explore between locations, not only walking this time, as you couldn't really do that before, but you'd also have a transportation device to, basically zoom around the region and the deserts as well, just like in the previous games. But now it could also go over bodies of water, up mountains, and do all sorts of stuff, so you could traverse the region like you can in the more recent games. And in a lot of these wild areas, once again, you'd see a lot of regular Pokemon just there for decoration, as well as a lot of Shadow Pokemon for you to snag in the Pokemon Legends Arceus style, which you'd later be able to purify through the same exact means of the last game. Your goal is to catch and purify as many Shadow Pokemon as you can, once again to try to stop the spread of the Shadow virus. So you won't just be stealing Shadow Pokemon from criminals, as they are now created organically in the wild thanks to this Meteorite's virus. The Shadow Pokemon in each area would vary, but I'll show you some examples of the Pokemon in each of these major areas that you would encounter, and almost all of them would be found as Shadow Pokemon as well. Now, on your way to the mining town of Pirate Town to investigate, you'd encounter a lot of desert and desert Pokemon. Pirate Town is a mining town of rogues and ruffians featured in the first two games, with the secret criminal civilization, the Under, hiding deep underground. You'd arrive in Pirate Town, where you clearly don't seem welcome, especially after being spotted by two criminals, Gonzap and Boone. The roided out one, Gonzap, is from the previous games and is the former leader of the criminal group Team Snag'em, while the cowboy looking character Boone is an original character I came up with to further expand the Orre region's western US inspirations, with little touches like the Star U badge or Pokeball shooting pistol to make it clear he's part of the Pokemon world. I also wanted to give him more mechanical looking cowboy boots to fit the more futuristic aesthetics of most of the Orre region's characters. Boone is a ruffian and outlaw in the Orre region, working for whoever's interests best serve him. Like Rui, much to Zion's surprise, they both seem to recognize you and go as far to call you the Shadow Slayer, as Gonzap tells Boone to leave the Shadow Slayer, you, to him, and that they can't let the boss find out about this. This once again confuses you, as you don't recognize any of these people until Gonzap steps forward and you get another glitchy flashback of him before the battle commences. Gonzap will use a small team of 2 for this battle, including a Shadow Diggersby, which you can snag using your Stag Machine. After defeating Gonzap, he says you aren't wanted here, and to mind your own business. Fearless, Zion will walk right past Gonzap, ignoring him as Mummion uses the eye on its tail to give him a mean look, and Drekion hisses at him while they pass by. Now, after making your way into the Pirate Cave, you'd find a bunch of infected Shadow Pokemon on your way to the Under, where you'd finally find Boone in the middle of a conversation with 3 thugs, as they are discussing Relgam Tower. At least that's all you can make out. After realizing you are behind him, Boone tells the other thugs to scram. Boone is surprised, yet impressed you managed to beat Gonzap, but says he won't be as easily defeated. He then challenges you to a double battle, starting off with Cacnea and Bramblin, followed by Lycanroc Midnight form, and a Shadow Lycanroc Midday form that you once again can snag. After defeating Boone, you realize this battle was a mere distraction. Zion demands answers, and Boone smirks, saying, "Ah, so you can show emotion after all," which only makes Zion even more upset. Slightly intimidated, Boone finally starts to speak, basically saying that the meteorite landing in the Orre region is no coincidence, just business as usual, and not even you, the Shadow Slayer, can stop what's coming. Boone then manages to shoot a smoke ball out of his Poké Pistol, allowing him to escape, with Drekion and Mummion briefly looking around for him in the smoke, until Zion tells him it's okay to give up the search, that they got the answers they came for. But then, out of nowhere, everyone starts running away in a panic, as you realize some rocks start to crumble from the ceiling as it's caving in. There's then a little earthquake, and someone runs by saying a wild Pokemon is destroying the mine shafts. It's gonna cave in. So naturally, you use your Ore Reader to try to find it and make your way back to the Pyrite Caves above, where you'd find the culprit, Shadow Trezor, from the Luika region, the first of the 7 sinister Shadow Pokemon you'd encounter as more action RPG and at times cinematic boss battles, this one representing the sin greed, as the search for or excavation of jewels and rare minerals are literally greed at its finest. I also felt it not only would make for a challenging boss battle, as its design is already tanky, but because its minor concept lent perfectly to the Orre region, especially within the location of Pyrite Town and the Pyrite Caves from the first two games, which already includes mine shafts. As for the difference in this shadow form, it once had a deep blue color, reflecting the tanzanite stone heavily excavated and sought after in Africa, but now has a bloody crimson red color, representing blood diamonds or blood money, not only fitting of greed, but the whole mining concept as well. Not to mention, perfect for Halloween, as it makes it look quite scary. Its drill-like arms also now have spikes along them, which it uses to execute its new signature shadow move, Shadow Drill, which works just like Dig, as it burrows under the ground for a turn until it's ready to come up and strike. In a rampage as it's infected to the point of mutation, Shadow Treasure is drilling through the caves, causing all the cave-ins, and at this rate it will eventually destroy the Under, with lots of people still down there. So you try to stop it, but it ends up chasing you through the mine shafts in sections of the battle. These would be the cinematic moments. There will be some cave-ins which will give you small windows of time to run, but like in Legends Arceus, if you take enough damage, you will faint. So you have to avoid its attacks and the falling rocks, and let your Pokemon auto-attack until the action commands appear, allowing you to enter the 2-on-1 turn-based sections where you can do some real damage. But be careful as its stats are a lot stronger. After defeating Shadow Treasure and capturing it with the Snag Machine, you'd find out you managed to save the Under, which brings you relief. So you'd return to Phoenix City to pass on what you've learned to Namid and Rui. Thankfully, Namid's L-Gem has since been purified, which you're happy to see, as it starts to float around and play with Mummyon and Drekion as you continue talking. But you'd show Rui Shadow Treasure, who is now under your command, but come to find out that it can't be purified through the normal means, as the darkness has seemed to mutate it too far. She says she's seen this once before, as this was the same case for Shadow Lugia after Michael captured it at the end of Gale of Darkness. So she then says you need to use the purification chamber to fix it, as that seemed to work for Michael before. You ask her where it's located, and she says with a frown that's a thing, it was destroyed. You ask why, and then she says, let's just say the wrong people didn't want it standing in the way of their plans, if the Shadow Pokémon were ever to return. You then tell her that makes sense, given the information you just got about all these criminal organizations knowing about this meteorite coming before it even happened, as Boone made it quite clear that this was planned. Frustrated, Zion says that they have to go to Relgam Tower after hearing the bad guys talk about this location. It's the only clue they've got. Namid says she was fine with meteorites and Pokemon from outer space, but now that her L-Gem's been purified, she'd rather sit this one out. But she says she'd love to help out by reaching out to her father to once again to try to see if any of his resources from his Totem Corporation can help them stop the spread of the Shadow Virus. Rui and Zion both agree that's a good idea. Rui says she will reach out to Professor Crane and Michael on your behalf while you investigate Relgam Tower. For those of you who are loyal fans to these games, Rui and Michael once again weren't ever in the same games and haven't met in the canon. But like I said, there is a massive time jump between this game and the last one, so it is quite clear that they've met between then and now. Now at Relgam Tower, which is yet another iconic location from the previous games, in the form of a members-only tower that is jam-packed with lots of entertainment, such as gaming areas, shopping areas, dining areas, in addition to its own suspended Coliseum for battling. In fact, like most of the previous games, a lot of these locations would have their own Coliseums for various tournaments to compete in outside of the main story, or capturing Shadow Pokemon in the wild, just to offer something new. You'd even be able to snag plenty of rare Shadow Pokemon from trainers in these tournaments, just like in the previous games as well. As I said though, this is an exclusive members-only tower and Coliseum, but you'd use your cunning mind to have Mummyon and Drekion cause a distraction long enough for you to hack your way in. While investigating Relgam Tower, you'd actually enter in and compete in a tournament just to get more information. At first they'd say your names are not on the list, but you'd use one of your high-tech devices so you're able to change that without them even noticing, as you tell them to look again, in which case they will apologize profusely. In the background there will be a mysterious girl eavesdropping into your conversation with her eye on you, with just the back of her head visible. That mysterious girl being none other than Twyla, whom I just introduced in the second DLC video for the Orre region, as she was a battle brain in the floating battle frontier. So it's only natural you'd encounter the former tower tycoon here at Relgum Tower, which is a fun little reference. While she comes across as bubbly with the occasional bite, when we last saw her she ended up playing an antagonistic role as she betrayed her grandfather and the former champion Odin in order to spite him for refusing to give her everything she felt she was promised, going as far to destroy the region. But to be fair, she was possessed by the dark aura of an evil legendary Pokemon, Frostfire, sealed away by her grandfather in an ancient artifact known as the Chaos Crown. While a young child, she snuck into his chamber and came across this Chaos Crown, which is how the darkness found its way inside of her, and she shared her mind and body with this dark entity ever since, leading her otherwise sweet self to do some of these heinous acts. However, her dark half likes to use her bubbly personality as a disguise, so you never know who you're actually talking to. Also, those of you who aren't familiar with mental health or split personality disorder, please know this is not that, especially as her darker half is the result of a literal dark entity stemming from a Pokemon living inside of her. So this is clearly all fiction, so please don't take it personally, don't jump to any conclusions or try to associate the two. It's not that deep, and those of you who are familiar with split personality disorder know that's not how it actually works. But that is an actual struggle that real people deal with, so I did want to make that clear just so no one, takes it personally, because I myself actually deal with my share of mental health issues. Anyways, Twyla's design is literally split in two to reference her dual nature, the light and the darkness, as well as Norse god Hel, who she is loosely inspired by as half of Hel is dead in a lot of the stories and depictions. Anyways, Twyla is back and up to no good again, but again hiding behind her true self's good girl persona, which Zion isn't falling for, by the way. Mostly because they don't really care for people, let alone anyone as happy or disingenuine as her. In fact, Drekion will growl at her when she goes to pet it after her first interaction with you. She tries to play it off with a laugh, saying she didn't mean to startle it was just too cute, and that she has two babies of her own who are just as protective. She then throws out her partner Pokemon Absol and Retri. For those of you who haven't followed my previous series, Retri being my own Fakemon I created in the Furin region to act as a counterpart to Absol, the yin to its yang, with its name being a play on retribution, as Absol's name is derived from absolution, and they are opposites. Mummion and Drekion don't seem to like Absol and Retri any more than they do Twyla though. Twyla once again plays it off giggling, saying, "Looks like they can't wait to battle, I look forward to it." She then skips away, but the look on Zion's face makes it clear they know something is off. You'd participate in the tournament, which is a series of short 2-on-2 double battles with opponents with tag-centric Pokemon until you finally face off against Twyla. After beating her, her dark side would briefly come out as she makes a snide comment, but after the match she would come to talk to you almost in private in this kind of like locker room setting detached from the Coliseum, where she will go right back to her good girl routine. But now that you're alone, you suddenly ask her why she has a snag machine of her own. Something you say you've been meaning to ask. By the way, those of you who followed my last series probably noticed she's had this snag machine all along. That is not a coincidence, but more on that later. She smirks and drops the act, and says, "You're quite smart for a hunk of metal." Immediately afterwards, the screen starts to glitch uncontrollably. So the last video left off on Relgum Tower after the hero Zion, aka you the player, just defeated Twyla and her Absol and Retri in a tag tournament. Twyla showed her true face and exposed yours as she revealed Zion to be a robot, as she referred to them as a hunk of metal, causing a massive glitch as the video ended, with a series of shots from the first game. The screen then cuts to Zion, whose eyes have activated and gone green, confirming them in fact to be some sort of robot. Twyla, who already was established in the Furin region as an incredible hacker and really good with technology after hacking robot battle brain Rob at the Battle Factory, attempts to do the same here with Zion while they're short-circuiting, but Mummion and Drekion quickly come in to defend Zion, and Twyla, after just losing the battle, currently doesn't have any Pokemon on her to help. Luckily, Zion quickly comes to before things escalate any further, wondering what happened. Twyla, or her dark side rather, starts laughing, saying, "Come on, how do you not know you're a robot?" Zion, confused, naturally wants to say, "No, I'm not," but before they can finish, looks at their hands and the lower half of their body, then at Mummion and Drekion, who look real sad, as it's clear they already knew, but obviously feel bad for their trainer who didn't. Zion then says, "But how? I don't understand. What is my purpose?" Twyla replies, "You're the Shadow Slayer, the name says it all. You were designed to find and acquire Shadow Pokémon for people like me, as we like Pokémon can be corrupted, so none of us can be trusted. However, you have no heart. You're nothing more than a programmable henchman, but even you couldn't manage to be loyal. You went from being our biggest asset to the biggest pain in our..." And then the screen starts to glitch again, as Zion continues the short circuit with memories after being overloaded with all this information. Drekion and Mummion seem worried as Twyla, with a big grin on her face, inches closer and closer, saying, "Don't worry, we'll get you good as new," as Cypher henchmen start rushing into the room. The screen then glitches out and goes black. After a brief pause, you wake up back in Phoenix City, with Mummion and Drekion curled up at the base of your bed, ecstatic to see you're okay as they go to kiss you in excitement. You then see Namid, who's excited to see you as well, and runs into the other room to declare that you're okay, as Rui enters, and much to your surprise, with the hero of the second game, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, Michael, behind her, with his Jolteon. As that's the evolution I decided fitted his personality most, as unlike the first game's protagonist West, who started with both Espeon and Umbreon already fully evolved, the second game's hero Michael started with an Eevee you could evolve however you saw fit. But given their connection to Professor Crane's lab and technology, I felt Jolteon made the most sense. It even fits Michael's design. I also decided to give Michael a Combot, a steel fighting type Pokemon from my Orre region, and obviously I felt it would fit right at home in the Orre region, being it's, well, a robot. This Combot would not only be a formidable battler just like his Jolteon, but help him perform various tasks in the lab, as would Jolteon, as it would use its electricity to help power or jumpstart some of their devices. And of course Michael would also have Lugia on his team, as Michael snagged a Shadow Lugia at the end of Gale of Darkness, and it was purified in the Purified Chamber before it was destroyed in the events leading up to this game. Anyways, Michael apparently came to save you immediately after Rui reached out, as he was already in the area, as Professor Crane and him were investigating the meteor at Cosmic Crater. That's how you managed to escape. Michael and Jolteon stepped in to stop Twyla and all the Team Cypher goons, then flew you off Relgam Tower on the back of his now purified Lugia. Taking this all in and having an existential crisis, Zion says to himself, "I'm not real," just totally confused, as if they're malfunctioning. Rui tells you to look at your two Pokemon, Mummion and Drekion, laying at the bottom of the bed worried sick about you. That if you weren't real, would they love you like they do? Would you love them like you do? Zion then goes to hug Mummion and Drekion real tight, and then turns to Rui and says, "You knew, all this time, you knew the truth about who or what I was. Why didn't you say anything?" Rui then says it's a lot more complicated than that. She says she was scared if they started to remember, that they'd remember the wrong things and fall back into their old programming. Without missing a beat, Zion says, "Old programming?" Michael will then chime in and say that is right. You, Zion, were created in the wrong hands as a weapon. Zion says, "By who?" And Michael says, "By me." And Professor Crane. At least we were involved in the project. Michael says he unknowingly helped assist in Zion's creation, as he was led to believe Zion was being built to protect the Orre region if Shadow Pokémon ever resurfaced. Michael then points out that, like Zion, he has a snag machine, saying he too once used for good, as did another, referring to Wes. So he thought this was a good idea, until he came to find that he was being manipulated after finding out about the meteorite made up of this dark substance and a device to attract it. After that, Michael was able to piece together his benefactor's real purpose for the Shadow Slayer. So he tells Zion he managed to sneak humanity into their programming as a failsafe, erasing the initial code intended for evil purposes entirely and installing real memories into his coding to further connect him to his humanity, then destroyed the lab, claiming that the Shadow Slayer was destroyed with it. So as far as this mysterious benefactor was concerned, the Shadow Slayer was destroyed in this freak lab fire, and Michael and Professor Crane distanced themselves from the project. So these benefactors, knowing something was up, ended up destroying the Purified Chamber in Professor Crane's Pokemon HQ lab in retaliation for destroying the Shadow Slayer, something Rui has previously mentioned or alluded to before, but offering even more insight into this incident. And like Rui implied, this was also done as a way to ensure it couldn't be used against them, especially now that Michael and Crane are seemingly aware of their plans. Michael says they hid Zion away, so no one would know of their existence until the meteorite grew near, in which case Michael activated Zion, but was shocked to discover Zion somehow became sentient. Michael says there is no real logical explanation for it, and if there is, he's still stumped. Rui then confirms this, saying she can even read an aura off of Zion. Riolu then gets up on top of Zion as it closes its eyes and puts its hand on Zion's heart, as if it's sensing their aura. Rui then says real sadly that Zion is all that is left of Wes. As the room goes quiet and the tension is high, that is until Namid peeks her head back in, snacking on something real loud, asking what she missed, clearly not reading the room. Michael says he knows you probably have a lot of questions and they will answer them all, but they don't have time at the moment. The virus is spreading, and more mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon, like Shadow Trezor, have been spotted throughout the region too, that they need your help stopping them. Zion starts to stand with the help of Mummion using its bandages to help hold them up. Zion then asks how they managed to purify Namid's L-Gem. Rui says that there's a stone called the Relic Stone with the ability to purify Pokemon, originally found in a shrine to Celebi within Agadi Village, but like the purification chamber has since been destroyed by an unknown organization, seemingly the same organization behind the creation of the Shadow Slayer, as they probably wanted to remove any obstacles that would stand in their way for whatever they had planned with this dark contagion on the meteor, which they seem to have attracted somehow. Rui then says fortunately for them, there's another relic stone hidden here, in Fennec City, deep within the Fennec catacombs, dedicated to the Wishmaker Jirachi. That's where she took Namid, as only a select few know about this more recently discovered shrine. Being as it's nighttime and no one is around, Rui will take you to the shrine hidden underneath the city's iconic water fountain as you start to decipher the ancient paintings on the wall, which seem to tell the origins of the first meteorite with the same virus that fell in the Orre region centuries ago, as what little remains of that dark substance that were unearthed is what eventually led to the Cypher's creation of Shadow Pokémon. So whoever is behind this meteorite crash clearly knew of the ancient stories, and how the same darkness once descended upon the Orre region. Namid then says she's seen this same story before back in Aqueni Village, the village her ancestors once called home, which is now basically kept up in honor of these people, almost like a museum. Zion then asks if her father, who runs the Totem Corporation in Neo Aquini, was able to help her at all, as she recently reached out to him while you went to investigate Relgam Tower. She said that his company was already looking into this meteorite and the Shadow virus, that he actually asked her to bring Zion to his lab so they could meet and figure out a solution together. So the bustling and technologically advanced Neo Aquini, the largest city in the Orre region, created for this project would be your next destination, as that's where the Totem headquarters, led by Namid's father Chatham, is located. But Michael provides you with a map with all of the mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon spotted throughout the region, some of which on your way to Neo Aquini, asking if you could help him combat these threats while en route. He then gives you a communicator so all of you can communicate with one another and stay updated. Michael then puts Jolteon back into its Pokeball and says they're going to search for Shadow Deoxys, as it seems to be the biggest threat they are facing at the moment. So Michael lets Lugia out of its Pokeball and jumps on top of its back as they wish you good luck before taking to the sky in search of Shadow Deoxys. Now, given this would be an open world game, I'm just gonna go in the order I think makes the most sense geographically, taking a break from the more desert-esque settings we've seen so far. So why don't we venture out west to the more lush green areas, which, by the way, although this map does feature a lot of the iconic locations from the Orre region, it doesn't feature a couple of the smaller locations, as they weren't really relevant to the story, and this is a more of an in-game map, especially as this game does take a significant time jump between the last game in the series, Gale of Darkness, and given where that story left off, some of these locations just wouldn't make sense in the scope of the story, but that doesn't mean they aren't still there in the region, even if they are just collecting cobwebs. Now that we are off to greener pastures, let's start off with another iconic location in the Orre region, Agadi Forest, as well as the Agadi Village found within this forest, which is swarming with a variety of new Pokemon and Shadow Pokemon for you to snag. The Relic Cave would also even be back for you to explore. But now back to Agadi Forest, and more importantly Agadi Village, which is a lush green town of senior citizens with cozy tree-like buildings beside a majestic waterfall. In the first game, Pokemon Coliseum, it was revealed Rui's grandparents both live within this peaceful village. So after one of the mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon, a Shadow Slacking, from the forest goes on a rampage, disrupting this normally quiet village, and threatening the older residents, most of which no longer capable of fending off such a foe, Rui asks you, aka Zion, to help protect her loved ones from this savage Pokemon. So this forest would be the location of your big boss battle against Shadow Slacking, representing the Sin Sloth. You know, because it's a sloth. However, this Slacking is no slacker. In fact, it's a total beast in every sense, as I decided to make it more feral, taking inspiration from the infamous movie monster King Kong, especially in its more intimidating and animated pose, with it standing up ready to throw down rather than laying down ready to take a nap. And while that's a mood, it wouldn't really make for an interesting boss battle. Now, outside of the obvious darker color palette and blood-red eyes, it has spiked up monster or villanesque hair and larger fangs to make it clear that this version isn't to be messed with. And while this shadow form does keep its signature ability, hindering it in battle, as it can only attack every other turn, that's only because its already monster stats are even higher now. So it will be that much harder to deal with, especially as its stats allow it to really take a hit. It even has a new powerful signature shadow move, Shadow Smash, that will demolish defensive measures such as Protect, Light Screen, or Reflect, but of course it can't attack after using this move, so it goes right back to being slow and sloth-like for a turn. Despite representing sloth though, Shadow Slacking is actually quite savage, constantly jumping around from tree to tree to avoid your Pokemon's auto attacks, and crashing back down to unleash powerful attacks of its own with its fists. It would also rip some small trees out from the ground and throw them at you or your Pokemon, which would trigger some action commands that can do damage and set up the traditional turn-based 2 vs 2 battles. But the thing is, to honor its ability and the Sin Sloth, after each big attack, it will start to lounge around for a bit, giving you a chance to get some auto attacks in, as well as initiate the typical turn-based style sections again. Towards the end of this boss battle, after getting its health into the yellow, Shadow Slacking will swing on over to a gaudy village to terrorize the citizens, jumping home to home, destroying the wooden structures. At one point it even goes to attack Rui's grandparents, but if you hit the action command button in time, Rui and her Riolu will step in to intercept it, as her Riolu evolves into a Lucario before your eyes, who is managing to hold off the much larger Shadow Slacking's fists. Another action command button will pop up, and if you hit it in time, her newly evolved Lucario will use an impressive Force Palm on Shadow Slacking, sending it flying, and even taking off a chunk of its health for you. It will then come charging at you, and in this time another action command will pop up, asking you to hit a button repeatedly as Lucario charges an Aura Sphere attack, and if you manage to hit the button fast enough before Slacking gets to you, it will launch, doing even more damage and triggering the turn-based style section, so you can hopefully finish Shadow Slacking off and snag it. Now, while this game is open world, there are a few moments within the story that you will have to do at certain points, and in a certain order, so next you'd have to head up north on your way to Neo Aqueni to meet Namid's father, but first you'd make a pit stop to the original Aqueni village, which is essentially a Native American reservation, as they preserved and maintained the original village Namid's ancestors once called home in order to honor its rich history in the Orre region. Namid will meet you here to show you some of the ancient drawings she remembers as a child, depicting the original meteorite that landed in the Orre region years ago, as she knew she recognized the drawings from the Fennec catacombs from somewhere. So whoever else knew the shadow substance from this meteorite led to the creation of Shadow Pokémon must be behind the plan to somehow attract this new Shadow meteorite in an attempt to create more Shadow Pokémon. So Namid is in full sleuthing mode. Anyways, there are plenty of unique Pokemon found around this reservation, and given the Midwest, which the Orre region is inspired by, has a lot of the same animal species as South America, there will even be a couple Pokemon from my third region, the Brazil-inspired Zoni region, including a brand new flying-type evolution, Avion. Normally evolved with a new stone known as the Sky Stone, typically found throughout the tropical Zoni region, where sky is the limit, and if you can dream it, you can do it. Avion is inspired by birds, as Brazil has such a wide variety of bird species. But I already have so many Pokemon planned for most of them in the Zoni region, so I chose to take most of its inspiration from Griffins, as I felt that just made sense for the design of a flying-type evolution, given it already has a similar body type. Plus, with my other two evolutions, Mummion being inspired by zombies, and Drekion being inspired by dragons, I wanted to stick in that theme with monsters for my evolutions. I also like my evolutions concepts to be somewhat generic in the sense that, like all the other evolutions, I want them to make sense and be found just about in any region. So I don't need them to be too specific to the region I introduced them in. But that being said, its shiny's darker coloration is a reference to the harpy eagle found in Brazil, which will have its own new Pokemon line in the Zoni region, as it's the Zoni's regional bird. Speaking of eagles, the fact that the common depiction of griffins also resemble bold eagles was the cherry on top of the sundae for me as far as its design goes, as bold eagles are an American staple and fit perfectly for the Orre region's Arizona settings. As I always planned on introducing this new evolution in this project, as Pokemon Gale of Darkness introduced a couple Gen 4 Pokemon before they were revealed, not to mention Eevee is the starter Pokemon of these games and the Orre region. Namid says she knows this Avian, that it was once her father's starter Pokemon as he evolved it from an Eevee as a child. It likes to migrate to and from the Zoni region to play with other Avian, but always comes back to him around this time of year, which is unfortunate given the release of the Shadow virus currently rampaging the region. But it works in your favor as you'd be able to snag the Shadow Pokemon and add it to your team before the release of the Zoni region's games. After snagging Shadow Avian, Namid will encourage you to purify it, saying her father will be thrilled to see his old companion, but she'd hate for him to see it like this. Namid then stops for a moment and says, now that she thinks about it, why is it that your Mummion and Drekion haven't been infected by the Shadow virus, especially after being exposed to all of these Shadow Pokemon? A little worried by this statement, Zion will use their Aura Reader to quickly scan their Pokemon, only to see they are still perfectly fine. Zion says they aren't sure, then takes a moment to think, but that it is quite peculiar that if they were to have a guess, given they were built as the Shadow Slayer to capture Shadow Pokemon by someone who clearly intended for this meteorite and virus to strike, it's likely they gave their Pokemon some sort of vaccination or immunity to the virus. Which, by the way, Zion's theory is correct. That is exactly what happened, which will be confirmed and explained a little bit more later on in the game. Next, you'd head right next door to the mega metropolis known as Neo Aqueni City to meet Namid's father, as I felt such a technologically advanced region, such as the Orre region, was really lacking a larger city, and I really liked the idea of connecting it to the Native American reservation to reflect the Totem Corporation's themes of using the past to build upon the future, to show how far Namid and her father's family have come in the Orre region, as I wanted to avoid representing Native Americans in a stereotypical way, and I liked the symmetry and symbolism behind all of this. You'd be able to explore this massive metropolis with various shops and even its own Coliseum with tournaments to participate in. There would be lots of electronic billboards with Easter eggs to Pokemon regions throughout the Pokemon universe, including some of my own. You'd even be able to spot a giant movie billboard with a new Zoni character and Pokemon on it. I wonder who that could be. And who's that Pokemon? I don't know, it looks kind of familiar. While here, you'd also encounter Rui, who is shopping for a new dress for her Lucario, which grew out of its old dress after evolving. By the way, her special Riolu and Lucario would be available as a special event Pokemon for Pokemon Brain and Pokemon Brawn, when connecting this game Pokemon Descent of Darkness.
Anyways, of course you're here to meet Namid's father, Chatham, head of the Totem Corporation, that is responsible for all of the Orre region's technological advancements and strides, a company that his father's father started decades ago and built from the ground up. And while he is very business-oriented and a workaholic, there is nothing more important to him than his family, as it is clear he loves his daughter, who idolizes him, and hopes to one day take over the Totem Corporation. So you'd head to Totem Tower, and after arriving, you'd use Namid's personal keycard to take an impressive glass elevator up to one of the top floors, straight to her father's equally as impressive private office and suite, with a gorgeous and nauseatingly high skyline view of the city through an enormous floor-to-ceiling window right behind Chatham's desk. Namid is happy to see her father and finally introduce him to Zion, as she really hopes he can use his resources to help them stop the spread of this virus. She runs to give him a big hug, and he twirls her around and gives her a sweet kiss on her forehead. Talking fast, she's excited to tell him that she encountered his old Avian. Surprised, he smirks and then says, "How rude of me," as he goes to greet Zion. saying his daughter has only said nice things about them. He shakes Zion's hand, which is a little drawn out and somewhat awkward. Chatham then asks Namid if she could give him some time alone with the Shadow Slayer. Namid agrees, but before leaving the room, turns around and asks her father how he knew to call Zion that, as she's never used that name to describe Zion
while discussing them with her father.
Zion, now on alert, lets out Mummion and Drekion as they know something is up. Chatham makes a comment about how his daughter is too smart for her own good, and that he'd hope it wouldn't come to this, but says not to resist and make things any more difficult than they have to be, as he challenges you to a Pokemon battle. Like most of the trainer battles in this game, this would be a double battle. Chatham would even have a Shadow Bouffalant on his team for you to snag. After the battle, Chatham would confess that the Totem Corporation were the ones who funded the creation not only of the Shadow Slayer, aka Zion, but the device that attracted the cosmic meteor as well, knowing very well that it would carry this dark contagion. But Chatham, ashamed, promises his daughter he only ever did it to protect her and the rest of their family. As the real mastermind behind this operation and reforming Cypher, promised their family would be protected after the fallout in exchange for all of their funding and resources. And that he pretty much had no real choice because he was told that him and the Totem Corporation could either comply and decide to be on the winning team, or Cypher would take what they wanted by force and he'd lose everything. So Chatham really isn't a bad guy and only did what he thought was best for his family. Namid, clearly upset with her father, says that doesn't make it alright. Chatham, calling her his sweet angel, says that she is so naive and that in the grand scheme of things, there is no such thing as right or wrong, good or evil, just life or death. And he chose life, as there is just way too much at stake. He then says he hopes she can forgive him one day, and maybe might even understand. Namid, disappointed, says it's not too late to make it right. He can help them by stopping Cypher and the spread of the virus. He then says he pretty much just helped fund and keep the lights on for this newly reformed Cypher Corporation, and that he really isn't privileged to that kind of knowledge. But having you come here was a setup, as they wanted to capture the Shadow Slayer now that they know it isn't destroyed. So right after Namid told him about Zion, he instantly knew she was talking about the Shadow Slayer, given the details within her story, which correlated with what he's been told. So he promised to deliver Zion to Cypher, who is now threatening his daughter, as someone in Cypher managed to snag some photos of Namid with Zion while in Phoenix City. Too upset to even look at her father any longer, holding back her tears, Namid apologizes to Zion
for unknowingly putting them in this situation.
Mummion then uses one of its bandages to help wipe her tears, and the normally distant Drekion lets down its guard and snuggles up against her leg to help comfort her as well. Namid then says they have to leave immediately. Chatham begs his daughter not to go, saying that she'd be making a big mistake if she chose a mere robot over her own flesh and blood. Namid, emotional, then says that Zion is more of a man than he will ever be. And before she can say any more, there's a loud explosion in the city. The three of them and Mummion and Drekion all then rush to the window to see what is up. And it turns out it was Shadow Deoxys, who has returned, now in its attack form, flying around aimlessly destroying the city for reasons unknown. Zion then looks down at Mummion and Drekion, as they all nod in agreement. They have to stop it before anyone else is hurt. But before they can do anything else, they then see Michael in the distance riding on top of their Lugia, flying towards Shadow Deoxys to try to take it down. There is then a massive cinematic cutscene of Michael riding Lugia, battling Shadow Deoxys in its attack form throughout the city, flying around buildings and streets. Deoxys will use its DNA arms to hurl cars at Lugia. Windows would be shattered as they fly across or up them in the struggle. Buildings would be destroyed, plenty of explosions. In fact, some of these moments would even have action commands, so you'd be involved. Although the fight would take them to Totem Tower, and Shadow Deoxys would stop mid-fight immediately after spotting Zion through the window, as there would be a cool horizontal shot of Shadow Deoxys floating outside one side of the window, with Zion inside the skyscraper looking right at it, paralleling each other. Lugia will then fly towards Shadow Deoxys, trying to continue the fight, but Shadow Deoxys would use its strands to hurl Lugia away as it stops everything and diverts its attention to Zion, bursting through the massive skyscraper window. There'd then be a brief shot of Michael on Lugia, injured but clearly okay. You'd all run out of Chatham's office into the massive hallways of the Totem facility with several labs behind glass walls. From here, your battle against Shadow Deoxys in its attack form would begin, taking you through the Totem facility into various lab rooms as your fight would shatter various glass and other structures throughout the tower. Now, unlike your last fight against Shadow Deoxys, this isn't a tutorial battle, and being that it is in its attack form, it's ready to annihilate you, so prepare for a challenging battle, and while you can use your auto attacks to weaken it outside of the normal turn-based sections of the battle, I'd avoid it altogether, as its attacks in this form and the overworld do a lot of damage and are relentless. It really likes to use its tentacle arms and whip them around and extend them. You can even hide behind various lab equipment or structures throughout the building. And with the red security sirens in the tower blaring as this fight would be going on, there would be a very horror-esque element to this fight, especially in the more cinematic parts, with the action command buttons, many of which where Drekion would go feral, or Mummion would use its bandages to throw beakers or lab equipment at Shadow Deoxys to try to buy Zion some time to run. After weakening Shadow Deoxys enough that its HP is in the yellow, the fight would end up on the rooftop of Totem Tower, where Chatham and Namid are boarding a private helicopter. Namid is screaming out from the helicopter, trying to get you on board, and saying not to leave you, but her father Chatham tells the pilot to take off immediately. Still on the rooftop, you'd continue your battle against Shadow Deoxys, as there would be an action command segment where Shadow Deoxys would wrap its strands around the helicopter tail and destroy it, and the tail blade, causing it to start plummeting from the sky, with Namid and Chatham still on board. Luckily, Lugia, with Michael still riding on it, would use its feet to grab hold of the burning chopper and bring them to safety on the rooftop. Michael, still on Lugia's back, would then throw a Pokeball, releasing Jolteon on the helicopter pad to help him fight. As you'd then have a series of even more cinematic action commands, being able to attack as Lugia flies around Shadow Deoxys, executing a series of powerful attacks, at the same time as Mummion, Drekion, and even Jolteon, as you're all teaming up against it. And each of these action commands would do a chunk of damage, and end the battle as Shadow Deoxys' health is already low. After defeating Shadow Deoxys, it would quickly swoop down and grab Lugia, with Michael still on its back, soaring into the sky, while extending its tentacle-like arms around Lugia and squeezing tightly to the point Lugia can no longer use its wings. Lugia is struggling to break free, and Michael is struggling to hold on as they are going higher and higher into the atmosphere above the city. A dark shadow energy is then released from Shadow Deoxys' tentacles directly into Lugia, who then closes its eyes and stops struggling. The screen goes black for a second, and then it will cut to Lugia opening its eyes, which are now bloodshot red, as it has once again transformed into Shadow Lugia after being infected by Shadow Deoxys. Shadow Deoxys then retracts its tentacles, freeing Shadow Lugia from its grasp as the two stare at each other high above in the sky, as if they are in agreement or somehow communicating telepathically. Michael, still on Lugia's back, terrified, pleads to his Lugia to fend off the darkness, saying that it's defeated it before. But Shadow Lugia, who turns its head to look back at its trainer, then with zero hesitation throws Michael off of it, as Zion, Namid, and the three Evolutions all watch, both in shock and devastation far below on the helicopter pad, as Michael helplessly starts plummeting to his doom. Once again, I'll be picking up right where the last chapter left off with the big cliffhanger, as former protagonist Michael was falling to his doom after being hurled off his Lugia, which has once again succumbed to the darkness after being infected by Shadow Deoxys in the midst of an epic fight. As Michael is plummeting from the sky, Zion and company down below are left in shock and must think fast. So Zion will throw out the recently snagged Avion
as it will soar into the sky to catch Michael, bringing him back to the top of the helicopter pad with the rest of the heroes. Everyone is thrilled to see Michael is okay, but no one more than his Jolteon, who throws itself into his arms, rubbing up against him with its spikes, which obviously isn't all that comfy for him, but he laughs as he's just happy to see his companion. Speaking of which, he's still in shock over what happened with his Lugia, terrified to see it go back into its shadow form, especially after how far they've come together. Everyone then looks up at Shadow Lugia and Shadow Deoxys, who are still just kind of floating up there in the sky, almost as if they're communicating with one another, as Shadow Deoxys will then transform into its speed form as they both soar away into the distance. Zion wonders why Shadow Deoxys was chasing after him. After having a brief reunion with their Avion, Chatham will then step in, saying Zion, who is the Shadow Slayer, aka a robot, is the key to the device that summoned this meteorite with the Dark Contagion, responsible for making Shadow Pokémon both artificially and now organically, as this virus has now landed back in the Orre region in its most potent form. He then says while Cypher believed the Shadow Slayer, aka Zion, was destroyed by Michael, they have future plans for this device, as this meteorite was just a prototype or test. The device Zion activates lures this dark substance that creates Shadow Pokémon like Frostmoths to a flame, and given the meteorite was swarming with this substance, this device was able to attract it to any set location. But it also turns out that Shadow Pokémon are triggered by this device as well, and given this device and Zion are two sides of the same coin, it turns out that the Shadow Pokémon are also triggered by Zion, which could also be used to explain why Zion is the one who's taking down and battling all these powerful Shadow Warp Pokémon, as they naturally attract them. Namid is obviously very upset with her father after finding out he's helped fund Cypher's work and these projects, and while she does have every right to be upset with him, I can't reiterate this enough, Chatham is not a bad guy. Sure, he's done some bad things, but he's not part of Team Cypher. All he did was help fund their projects, and only as his family and daughter was threatened multiple times. And while he was aware of what Cypher was doing, he was also aware that they would have been able to take whatever they wanted regardless of the stance he took. But giving it to them willingly ensured his family's safety after all was said and done when this meteorite and the Shadow virus arrived. And he would do anything to protect his family. So if you ask me, that makes him a good guy, or at least nuanced. I don't think it's fair to completely pin him as a villain, even though he did play an antagonistic role in the last part, trying to turn in Zion to Cypher, but in his defense, Zion is a mere robot and his daughter Namid was threatened. Chatham then informs you that Cypher plans to use this device to have meteorites just like this one crash down into every region and unleash this dark contagion of Shadow Pokémon for them to control, as they would then sell the snag machine in bulk, and possibly even new Shadow Slayer models, to each region's criminal organizations at an insanely high price, giving Cypher unlimited power and resources worldwide. But in order to see this plan through, they first need Zion back. Zion then mentions what they and Namid were talking about in the last video, saying their Pokemon Mummion and Drekion appear to be immune to the Shadow virus. Michael then chimes in saying they in fact are, that after uncovering a secret lab in the facility he was working on the Shadow Slayer, he not only found blueprints for the device to summon the meteor, but found a small dose of what appeared to be a backup vaccine in case Cypher's plans backfired. He used what little amount of this vaccine he found on Mummion and Drekion before reprogramming Zion, so that if they were ever to fall back into their old programming, these two Pokemon would remain pure and would hopefully be able to help them find their way back to their humanity. Mummion then extends its bandaged tail using the hand at the end of it to give Michael a big high five, and Drekion lets out a growl of approval, as they both look up at Zion with nothing but love in their eyes. Namid, terrified to hear what Cypher has planned, starts to panic, pacing in circles, saying she is too young to die, that she hasn't even encountered an Ultra Beast yet. Her father tries to comfort her, putting his hand on her shoulder, telling her this is exactly what he was trying to protect her from, but she brushes it off, and while she is still having trouble looking at him, the scared little girl inside of her asks him if there is anything he can do to make this right, as it's clear she wants nothing more than to be able to forgive her father. She's just not quite there yet. Chatham then goes to hug her, saying he will make sure nothing happens to her, but unfortunately he's told them everything he knows. Michael then asks if he knows where this device is. Chatham says he's unsure where the device is currently being held, as it's been moved around a lot in order to keep its whereabouts a secret. He would have assumed it was in the lab where Zion was built,
which was burnt down by Michael in order to stop their sinister plans, but apparently not. Chatham does say all of their answers can be found within Zion's memories though, but Zion says they aren't their own, they belong to Wes. Chatham replies precisely, looking at Michael, who is clearly uncomfortable by this statement, as Michael then goes to say accessing those memories is far too dangerous as it could return Zion to their initial programming. Michael, hesitant, then says he does believe Zion deserves to know the truth at this point, and if they are going to activate these memories, they need to go to Professor Crane's Pokemon HQ lab. He also says maybe while there, they can try to take a look at the vaccine inside of Mummion and Drekion to possibly try to recreate it as a failsafe. Something he would have already done when he was already putting the vaccine inside of them, but couldn't have as he was already very low in time, as he also had to reprogram Zion and destroy the lab before anyone else caught him. So Professor Crane's HQ lab would be your next location, but before your journey continues there would be a cutscene in a dark lair where Twyla, followed by Cypher Goons, goes to speak to a mysterious figure shrouded in darkness, and their voice also seems to be disguised. Twyla shoos the goons away as she clearly has power over Team Cypher.
Beat it. You've done enough. By that I mean absolutely nothing.
Where is it? I didn't expect you, of all people, to come up empty-handed.
Twyla then says the Shadow Slayer not only seems to be going against its programming, but even appears to be sentient.
Impossible. The professor and that little twerp must be the ones behind this. Go finish what we started and burn their lab to the ground. An eye for an eye.
Twyla smiles, saying leave it to me, as she turns to leave, but then quickly turns around to tell this mysterious figure,
I'm not another one of your puppets on a string. Don't forget we had a deal. I hope for everyone's sake you're able to keep up your end of the bargain.
You have my word.
And then Twyla rolls her eyes and chuckles.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much that is worth.
Walking away, as the screen would cut to a close-up shot of her evil grin as she walks out of this dark room. Before we go any further, if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to show your boy some love and hit that like button, leave a comment down below to let me know what you think, and most importantly, please subscribe to my channel so I can keep it growing. As most of you know by now, while the concepts and designs featured on my channel are all my own, I don't actually draw the artwork featured in my videos, as I have commissioned over 40 talented artists who I work with intimately throughout the creative process down to the tiniest of details, so I could take you on these exciting journeys through my imagination. So please make sure to go follow and support all of them as well. Their links will be provided down below in the description. Next, you'd head to Professor Crane's Pokemon HQ lab, but before doing so, you'd take a quick detour to the neighboring Harfest farmlands, which appear to be under attack by yet another mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon. Next up is Shadow Hatterene, representing the sin Lust, as I feel witches have always had a sense of allure to them, often using things like love spells or potions to make others fall in love with them. Despite its normal colors being bright and cutesy, Hatterene has one of the most disturbing Pokedex entries, so taking that into account, I felt its witchy design would be perfect for a Shadow Pokemon, as I wanted to take the opportunity to darken it up a bit and make it even more wretched and spooky like an evil witch. This was achieved not only with a darker color palette, but a sharper monster-like claw, and adding some tears and spikes to its witch's hat, with its rim now shaped like a crescent moon. Its new stats lean even heavier into its special attack stats, so it can cast curses on its foes and make the most of its new signature shadow move, Shadow Spell, which would put a love spell on the foe, fitting of the sin Lust, as the target would become infatuated with it, which would make for a challenging boss battle. But more on that in a bit. Anyways, Zion and Michael agree to help out the local farmers by snagging the pesky Shadow Pokemon. So you'd head to the Harfest farms, where you'd not only encounter various farm animal-inspired Pokemon and Shadow Pokemon for you to snag, but yet another mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon, as you know, in the form of Shadow Hatterene. Michael will use Combat to survey the area as Zion uses their tech to do the same, both coming to the conclusion that the attack on crops weren't actually done by the Shadow Warp Hatterene everyone seems to have identified, but rather a bunch of berserk wild Pokemon. A farmer then appears to say that's correct, his own Pokemon that normally help him take care of the crops have not only gone feral and started destroying them, but attacking him as well. Michael then claims they must have been infected by the Shadow Virus, and Zion, using the data they collect, says not quite, that while the virus has clearly made it here, the attacks performed by these Pokemon show no sign of this shadow substance. Michael then asks what could cause them to turn on their trainer like that, as Michael himself is triggered by their Shadow Lugia throwing him off of it, as a form of PTSD. Zion then asks if Michael is okay, noticing something is up, and Combot looks at its trainer confused, but Michael says he is fine, shaking it off as he is clearly hurt by how fast their Lugia turned on him. After exploring more of the farmlands, it would start to get dark, and as the sun sets, the farmer would invite you to stay the night as it's too dangerous to be out here at night, especially with this Pokemon roaming around. Zion says they aren't scared, but that's why they're here after all. Then they hear a Pokemon cry off in the distance and run to a massive corn maze, where they are able to spot
Shadow Hatterene.
Michael will throw out his Jolteon and tell it to use Thunderbolt, but the attack is intercepted by a wild Murkrow, seemingly at Hatterene's command. Hatterene then seems to cast some sort of spell on Jolteon, commands it again, but instead it uses Thunderbolt on him, as it's now enthralled by Hatterene, as if it's in love with it, no longer listening to Michael's commands, and runs beside Hatterene. Michael, heartbroken to have this happen again, pleads to Jolteon to fight off Hatterene's control, but Hatterene ominously floats into the cornfield. Zion decides to follow in after it, with Mummion and Drekion behind them. But before doing so, Zion will encourage Michael to use Combot, as it should be immune to Shadow Hatterene's love spell, as it's genderless. So you'd explore this spooky corn maze at sunset with an orange and blood red sky and dark clouds looming above. This dark corn maze acts as a labyrinth, so you'd chase Hatterene around, but it would use its allure and control over other wild Pokemon such as Murkrow, Dustox, or Pumpkaboo within the maze to attack you outside of the classic turn-based style sections of battle. You can auto-attack in the overworld sections of this battle, with several cinematic action commands in response to these wild Pokemon attacks, such as Mummion using a bunch of bandages to wrap up a group of Murkrow, while Drekion then uses the wrapped up Murkrow to jump across them,
jumping over one of the walls of corn to attack Shadow Hatterene. And after weakening Shadow Hatterene enough,
you'd finally be able to corner it in the corn maze. But that's when it would summon a swarm of Gourgeist to help it battle, which you have to take down in the turn-based style sections first. After defeating all of the wild Gourgeist, Michael will show up with Combot to help you fight, but is stopped by his love-struck Jolteon,
still under Hatterene's command,
who growls at him. Michael, unfazed, looks Jolteon in its eyes, once again pleading to it to fight Hatterene's control over it.
Hatterene, who uses the claw on its hat,
commands Jolteon to finish them, but before it can build a charge, Michael hurls himself at it, giving it a big hug despite all of its spikes, as the scene where they hugged immediately after Michael was rescued from near death appears as Jolteon seems touched by this moment.
Able to break through its infatuation for Hatterene,
as an action command appears, and if you hit it in time,
it will then use Thunderbolt on an unexpected Hatterene instead.
Then another few action commands will appear, allowing you to attack once more as Combot
to deliver the final blow, ending the battle.
You'd then be able to snag Shadow Hatterene, as all the Pokemon seemingly under its spell appear to be set free as a scene of them running out of the corn maze or wherever they're hiding back to the farm appears. Michael will then have a touching moment with his Jolteon and Combot, hugging them, saying how much they mean to him, thanking them for fighting beside him. Zion seems touched by this, kneeling down to pet Mummion and Drekion, who seem very pleased by this show of affection. Zion then tells there are two Pokemon, I may not have a heart, but wherever in my programming these human emotions originate from, that part of me beats for the two of you. They both rub up against Zion, and Michael, now standing above Zion, teases them, saying that was awfully cheesy, and Zion actually laughs, much to everyone's surprise. Especially Zion's, as they can't help but smile afterwards. Then Zion and Michael begin to laugh together in disbelief and celebration of Zion's new range of emotion. Next, you'd return back to Professor Crane's Pokemon HQ lab. There, Michael would try to reactivate Zion's memories with help from Professor Crane and his Combot. But before they can go any further, there'd be a brief blackout. Michael then uses his device to discover it seems related to the power plant to the north of the region that generates the power for the majority of the Orre region. He would then also notice a Shadow Warp Pokemon seems to be spotted there, so it can't be a coincidence. He says maybe the Shadow Warp Pokemon is targeting the power plant, as that might be where the Cypher device to attract the contagion is currently being held. Professor Crane will say regardless, it's too dangerous to try to reactivate Zion's memories if the power continues to go out. So it's best they stop this Pokemon first, but Michael says in order to get to the Rival Dam, they would first have to go over Snowbellow Mountain, but there just so happens to be yet another Shadow Warp Pokemon causing chaos on Snowbellow slopes for Zion to snag on their way. So next you'd head to this snowy mountain I created for the Orre region to add more diversity to the region's locations and more ice types to the Orre region in more organic ways. Naturally, you'd encounter a lot of ice-type Pokemon here, including a lot of Shadow Pokemon for you to snag. At the top of the slopes, you'd arrive in Snowbellow Town. Michael arrives telling you this cozy town is essentially for the tourists or travelers, as it's known for its ski resort and slopes. Although turns out the resort has been losing business as a lot of the skiers or snowboarders have reported a rampaging Pokemon attacking them on the slopes. This Pokemon being another one of the mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon and boss battles in the form of Shadow Mamoswine,
representing gluttony. As its name suggests, it is part swine or pig, so I felt it fit, as most pig Pokemon aren't really as big or intimidating as Mamoswine, and lots of the other Pokemon I felt fit gluttony, such as Snorlax, were too close to slacking, or could have just as easily fit some of the other sins such as Sloth. But what ultimately led me to end up on Mamoswine was the fact that it fit one of the new locations I added to the Orre region, inspired by ski slopes. As I wanted to make the region more diverse and be able to add more ice types into the region more organically. So Mamoswine felt like a good fit for this new snowy area, and like it would provide a challenging boss battle. Its design scraps brown in favor of black, now sporting a longer, more villainous beard, as well as a more cracked skull-like headpiece, with the same cracks also being incorporated into its tusks, to give it more of a worn look. Its signature shadow move, Shadow Slurp, acts like moves such as Giga Drain, absorbing some of the target's HP, depending on the amount dealt, which I felt was fitting for gluttony as it's literally devouring their health.
Michael decides to leave the Shadow Mamoswine to you and says to be quick as he will meet you at Revolt Dam. You'd head to the slopes to find Shadow Mamoswine, but first encounter a snowboarder who turns out to be no other than Grusha, who is visiting from the Paldea region to enjoy the slopes. Clearly at the worst possible time with the release of this shadow virus. However, Grusha is also determined to stop this dangerous Pokemon to protect others trying to enjoy the slopes with help of their new Glaceon, as they've acquired it while here in the Orre region, as Eevee and the Eeveelutions are kind of the starters of this region. And I wanted each Eeveelution to be on at least one trainer's team within this story, so you'll have to wait to see where all the others fall. While Grusha admires you for trying to stop the Shadow Pokemon, you'd actually get to battle Grusha here, as he isn't willing to let you steal all of the glory for stopping the Pokemon after he's already had a few tuffles with it. Grusha would have a new updated team tailor-fitted for the Orre region. After defeating Grusha, he will recommend that you both head back to the lodge to heal your Pokemon. Afterwards, he'd say maybe it is best you team up to stop Shadow Mamoswine after all, saying he has an idea after getting to know the mountain very well to attract this Pokemon. So Grusha snowboarding down the slope will essentially act as the bait, trusting you to stop Shadow Mamoswine. While battling Shadow Mamoswine on the snowy slope, you'd ride your advanced hover cycle, which by the way is the exact same bike Wes used in Pokemon Coliseum, to zoom across the deserts. However, in this game, it can be used on various different terrain, including the snow, where it would act like a snowmobile. So while you'd stop on sections of the mountain to participate in the traditional 2 versus 1 turn-based style sections of battle, the more RPG style sections would be more fast-paced, racing down the slopes over the hills and avoiding trees and other obstacles on your bike until you catch up with Shadow Mamoswine and either enter the classic turn-based style sections of battle or as the cinematic action commands pop up, many of which you will actually attack as Grusha and Glaceon, who are snowboarding down the slope together, or your Mummion and Drekion in the bike's side cart that Umbreon and Espeon used to sit in Pokemon Coliseum. After getting its health down into the yellow, you'd end up in a log cabin, where you'd have to hide from Shadow Mamoswine as it's attacking and destroying the cabin. But in these action commands, you'd also get to attack as Grusha and Glaceon again, as well as your own Eeveelutions,
to defend yourself from this rampaging Pokemon long enough to get back outside while it's distracted and stuck within the cabin, and then drive your hover bike right into Mamoswine and finish it off, ending the battle.
After snagging Shadow Mamoswine, Grusha will thank you for your assistance, saying he is glad the resort can return to business as usual, but they must admit having the rampaging Mamoswine really added some extra excitement for him, as he's an adrenaline junkie. The normally tough-as-nails Drekion seems to have developed a big crush on Grusha's Glaceon, by the way, but Mamion is not here for it, using her bandages to hold Drekion back as it makes its move, akin to Brock and Misty in the Pokemon anime. They all begin to laugh as poor Drekion, struggling to break free from Mamion's grasp, seems irritated. Glaceon will then walk up to Drekion and give it a kiss on its forehead, leaving a cold chill or a bit of a frost as it turns red. Mamion lets Drekion free, and Glaceon, continuing to play it cool, struts back to its trainer as they wave goodbye, wishing you luck on stopping the rest of the Shadow Warp Pokemon. Next, you'd go down to the east side of the mountain to Ashton Town, inspired by actual small towns in Arizona with inspiration from Phoenix, Arizona. Ashton is a charming desert-esque town built around the canyon right at the base of Revolt Dam. In fact, the people in the town seem to be worried the dam will be destroyed by this restless Shadow Warp Pokemon, as there have apparently not only been even more power outages throughout the region while you were on Snowbellow Slopes, but the river is starting to overflow as the dam has been cracked. Zion, however, promises to stop the Shadow Pokemon, but Cowboy and Cypher member Boone appears on the back of a Mudsdale to say they cannot allow you to go any further and catch yet another Shadow Warp Pokemon. Zion says they have no time to waste, that if they don't stop this Shadow Warp Pokemon, this town beneath the dam could potentially be wiped off the map completely. Boone says he won't allow that to happen, as he himself lives here in this town and as people he cares about here. So he has no intention of letting anyone get hurt, but he also says he has orders he's been given by his boss at Team Cypher that he cannot fail. So he must be the one to stop and snag this Shadow Warp Pokemon. So you then have yet another battle against Boone, who has an updated team of Wild West-inspired Pokemon that will make for a challenging double battle, as his Bramblin and Cacnea have evolved since you last battled him, and he swapped out his Lycanroc for his trusty ride Pokemon Mudsdale, with the star of his team being a brand new Pokemon from my upcoming Brazil-inspired Fakemon region, the Zoni region, known as Gauchiro, which evolves from the small but scrappy Coatail, both of which using their long lasso-like tails to herd and wrangle in wild Pokemon such as Bouffalant, Miltank, and Tauros. While native to the Zoni region, they can obviously be found in the Orre region as well, as they're inspired by Coati, which is a member of the raccoon family found in Arizona to South America, which is why I felt this line fit right at home in the Orre region, being inspired by Arizona. This line is also inspired heavily by the Gaucho, which are the traditional cowboys in regions of southern Brazil, as well as other South American countries such as Argentina and Chile, with their unique lassos being incorporated into their tails. Gauchos, like cowboys, would ride horses and herd cattle, but unlike the cowboys in American culture, these cowboys weren't seen as outlaws, but rather more as heroes, which is where their fighting typing and names come into play, and why they appear in this chapter of the story to reflect the fact that Boone honestly believes he is the hero despite working for the bad guys. And I'm sure with Chatham's situation being so similar, you're starting to sense a theme here that is intentional, as this is a theme woven into the story that will appear again, as I really wanted to question the fine line between good and evil, as I felt this theme really fit the whole idea of Shadow Pokemon. Because a lot of times we are the heroes of our own stories, and oftentimes the villains of somebody else's. So it's all subjective, really, and nothing is in black and white. Anyways, back to the story. In the middle of the battle, a woman and a little boy with the cowboy hat would appear, cheering Boone on, as the little boy proudly says, "That's my daddy." Boone then reminds Zion that, as he told him before, that he isn't a bad guy, he just takes jobs wherever he can get them from the highest bidder, as it's not only a way to provide for his family, but fight crime head on. Zion asks how working for a bad guy is fighting crime. The little boy, upset, then says that his daddy isn't a bad guy, that he's a hero. Boone then says if he's ever found the person to hire him to be unethical, he has single-handedly stopped them. But as far as he can tell, Cypher's only trying to snag and control the Shadow Pokemon to protect the Orre region. That's why his boss wants the Shadow Slayer back, and that he truly believes his boss to be a good guy, otherwise he would have never taken the job. Zion then tells Boone he is being lied to and manipulated, just as Michael and Professor Crane were in the development of the Shadow Slayer, that whoever is running the show clearly tells people exactly what they want to hear in order to control them. Boone, triggered by this, proudly says, "No one controls me," and that he wouldn't expect a robot like Zion to understand something as complex as human emotions or intentions. And like Chatham, he was also promised his family would be kept safe from the aftermath of this dark contagion, as his Poke Pistol has been upgraded to work as a snag machine capable of loading Pokeballs and converting them into snag balls, allowing him to snag Shadow Pokemon and use them to fight beside him, as he did back in the Under. After finally defeating Boone, he will say that you bested him once again, and Zion will try to tell them about Cypher's true plans, but before they can, Boone tells you to stop wasting any more time and hurry up and stop the Shadow Pokemon before it's too late, as his family and town are in danger, and he obviously can't do anything about it at the moment. Zion will then get on their motorcycle, looking over at Boone with his family, seeing just how different he is as he kisses his sweet wife and plays with his son, as the little boy says, "Don't worry, you're still the winner to me, Dad." Zion smiles and drives away as you'd make your way to Revolt Dam to face the culprit behind the blackouts, Shadow Milotic, who you'd face in the reservoir above the dam as it continues to attack the dam wall.
For the Sin Pride, I chose Milotic, one of the Pokemon most associated with beauty, especially as its pre-evolution Feebas once required immense beauty in Pokemon contests in order to even evolve into it. So this one was a no-brainer for me, as I felt darkening its normally elegant design would result in something hauntingly beautiful. At least that's what I was going for. Not to mention the Orre region has always featured a lot of Hoenn Pokemon, as the games were released once again in Generation 3. And this boss battle takes place around a new waterfall and dam area I added to the region. Its tail and ears are made of pure darkness, as they almost look like purple flames, with the patterns along its tail now made to look like shattered glass, as I felt this would really help add an extra ominous element to the design and further the hauntingly beautiful look I was going for. Its signature move, Shadow Wave, would crash down on the foe, returning them to the party and switching out a new Pokemon in its place. This not only is to reflect the strong currents of water-type moves, and as a callback to one of my original moves I created, Riptide, but to represent pride, as this Pokemon feels no foe is good enough for it, so it's constantly shuffling them around in discontent.
In this battle, you'd only have short windows outside of the turn-based style sections to auto-attack Shadow Milotic, as it would escape by diving into the lake, only emerging to attack you, which would add a real horror element to this battle, as you can see its silhouette slithering beneath the water, but it is still hard to know when it will strike, as its overworld attacks are so abrupt and unpredictable. But a lot of these attacks can be countered using the cinematic action commands, including one where Mummion uses its bandages to grab hold of Milotic just as it jumps out of the water, long enough for Drekion to run up the bandages and attack Milotic, as it would end up being submerged under the water with it clawing at it beneath the surface,
Fighting for its dear life as Milotic tries to drown it.
until it blasts Drekion back out of the water in order to defend itself.
And of course, a worried Zion and Mummion would rush to Drekion's side after it's hurled back to the surface after nearly being drowned.
Throughout the battle, there would be cutscenes of Michael and his Jolteon in combat, struggling to stop the issues within the dam's power plant, as time seems to be running out. After getting it weak enough, Rui and her Lucario will appear, as Rui's Lucario uses Orre beneath its feet to walk on the water and kick the crap out of Shadow Milotic, as a series of action commands appear on the screen for you to hit as you attack as Lucario, until finishing off Shadow Milotic with her Lucario's signature move, Aura Twirl, where it grabs hold of Shadow Milotic's tail, engulfing itself in Aura as it quickly starts twirling Shadow Milotic around with great speed, throwing it across the water until it hits a rock wall, finishing it off, allowing you to snag Shadow Milotic. There will then be a cutscene to Michael, who lets out a sigh of relief as they seem to fix problems inside the dam at the nick of time.
With the help of their Pokemon, of course.
You'd catch up with Rui and Michael outside the dam, saying it's time to head back to the professor's lab to give Zion their memories back. Rui also seems to be really nervous about this, asking Michael if they're sure that's a good idea. Michael then says that Zion is their own person, and they deserve the truth if they are ever really to live. Rui agrees and asks Zion to please forgive her. Zion, confused, asks why, but Michael then gets a distressing call from Professor Crane, begging Michael to head back to the lab immediately as it's under attack.
As it turns out that Cypher planted Shadow Milotic at the dam to cause the power outages as a diversion.
Twyla can be seen in the back of the screen with her Absol and Retri as the lab seems to be attacked by them. Before you all can rush to the lab to save it, Zion gets another frantic call as well from Namid, who says she has been able to use her tech to locate Shadow Deoxys, and shocker, it's heading their way really fast. The group, overwhelmed by all this information, decides to split up. Michael will rush back to the lab assisted by Rui, while Namid will try to meet Zion in the desert canyon range, saying if he can find a way to lure Deoxys to this isolated area, she can use some of her tech to help him trap it without anyone getting hurt, as there should be no civilians in or around this area. So the team will do exactly that. But on your way, make sure to explore the Horsey Canyon I added to the region, inspired by Horseshoe Bend, as there are plenty of strong Shadow Pokemon here to snag, some of which may be useful in your next battle. After making it to the desert, which is home to a variety of even more new Pokemon for you to snag, Zion will be approached by Shadow Deoxys, still in its speed form, but luckily Namid has set up a bunch of her high-end traps in the desert with help from her father Chatham, who is trying his best to make amends with her. So you'd have the upper hand as you enter in a high-speed chase and battle through the desert against Shadow Deoxys in its speed form on your motorcycle, which once again is the same one Wes used in Pokemon Coliseum to speed through the Orre Region's desert, with Mummion and Drekion in your sidecart able to auto-attack if you get close enough in range, which will be hard by the way, and of course there will be even more cinematic action commands where you dodge desert obstacles like cacti, boulders, giant cliffs, and even plenty of wild Pokemon. In fact, in one of the action commands, you'd even have to ride up a wild Onyx, as it's just too big to avoid. So instead, thinking on their feet, Zion uses it as a ramp to reach Shadow Deoxys as it runs straight up a steep cliff. After reaching areas like this or dealing enough damage, you'd slow Deoxys down enough to end up in the classic turn-based style sections of battle. And after getting Shadow Deoxys' health into the yellow, you'd have yet another cinematic action command where Shadow Deoxys will pick up speed bursting around, but Mummion will use its bandages to wrap around the base of Deoxys' legs, trying to reel it in, but Deoxys is too strong, so it ends up pulling Zion and the entire motorcycle, dragging them through the sand and beating them around the desert as it bursts around, banging them into cliffs and cacti to try to break free. Drekion uses its strength to try to hold on tight to Mummion so they don't lose their grasp, but unfortunately they do end up crashing, and Deoxys escapes. Your motorcycle would be damaged, but not destroyed. All would seem lost at this moment, but then you'd see Namid and her Elgym off in the distance hiding behind a rock structure with one of their traps in the ready. After she gives you the signal, one last action command button will appear, and if hit, Drekion and Mummion will both charge at Deoxys at the same time, helping to push it right into this trap, ending the battle. Deoxys, being electrified by this high-tech trap, switches to its defense form to protect itself and escape before Zion has a chance to snag it. Although they failed, at least they made it out alive, and Namid, exhilarated, goes on about how cool that was with them racing through the desert and the fighting and the explosions and the cliffs being destroyed, but Zion is tuned out as they are worried about the others back at the lab. Speaking of which, there will be another cutscene of Michael and Rui, who finally arrive at the lab, but are too late as Professor Crane, injured, crawls to Michael's feet as the lab is up in flames, and with it all of their data on the Shadow Pokemon and the progress they made on the new Purify Chamber. Twyla then steps out from the smoke with a big smirk on her face. Michael, furious, sends Jolteon and Combat out, both ready to battle. Rui and her Lucario are also ready to throw down. She sends out her Sylveon to help her fight as well. But Twyla, unimpressed, laughs, saying that's all you've got? She then throws out Shadow Lugia, much to everyone's surprise. Yep, you heard me correct. It seems that Twyla has since snagged Michael's old Lugia. Michael is just as shocked, asking how. Twyla then says,
I'm stronger than I look. Honey, this isn't even the first legendary Pokemon I've caught.
referring to her Zekrom and Reshiram, as well as the formidable Frostfire from the Fearin Saga's King's Bounty DLC. Michael tells her to let it go, as that Lugia belongs to him. Twyla then laughs, saying, you snagged this Pokemon no different than me. Believe it or not, we go way back. Well, kind of. You see, my sister, created this beast in a lab. Michael then says, your sister? Twyla then says that's right, but you know her as Lavrina. Michael then gasps in disbelief, because for those of you who played Pokemon Gale of Darkness, Lavrina is a former antagonist and admin of Team Cypher who ran Cypher's research and development team, responsible for creating Shadow Lugia or Experiment XD001 in the first place. which is exactly what Twyla is referring to. Lavrina was a hyperactive and sadistic trainer obsessed with beauty and power who had a real nasty bite. In fact, one of Cypher's researchers called Lavrina nothing short of terrifying in the original games. Sound familiar? Just like Twyla. Michael then says he stopped her sister and he will stop her too. Twyla, whose personality has changed and seems timid and scared, says,
"You may have locked her up, but you haven't stopped her. Not yet. But you have to, before she comes back."
Michael asks what she means, and Twyla's dark half takes over, saying,
Did you miss me, Mikey?
I'd like to pick this chapter off right where it left off after Twyla's big reveal. Michael asks how this is possible, and Twyla will reveal that former Cypher member Lavrina and scientists responsible for creating XD001, aka Shadow Lugia, also did experiments on people. It turns out Twyla isn't technically Lavrina's sister as she said or suggested, but rather her clone. She was created before Team Cypher was taken down, and Lavrina and Dr. Greevil were all locked up at the end of Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. In fact, it turns out it was Lavrina's work on humans and the human consciousness that inspired the Shadow Slayer model, aka Zion, in the first place. So in a sense, she kind of birthed Zion as well, even though she wasn't directly involved in their creation. But Lavrina's clones all had her consciousness and memories hardwired into them in the same sense that Zion seems to have Wes's memories and emotions hardwired into them. And this young clone, aka Twyla, was found when these labs were raided, and Odin's family ended up adopting her as he found her through the omniscient divine Pokemon Edlodin's visions, as it foresaw greatness in her, because don't forget, at one point both Champion Odin and Edlodin thought that Twyla would succeed him as champion one day. But Edlodin's visions are limited and vague, as I've explained in the Firen Saga, so this Pokemon was unable to see the full extent of the darkness within her, which was later awakened after this young clone entered Odin's chamber and came into contact with the Chaos Crown, which, as a lot of you already know, allowed the darkness within the crown, which was fragments of the legendary and destructive Frostfire, to make its way into Twyla. But turns out this darkness was actually similar to the dark contagion that creates Shadow Pokémon by shutting off their hearts, and actually awakens Lavrina's dormant consciousness within Twyla, allowing this part of her consciousness to live alongside the real Twyla, who was raised by Odin's family and was a good girl who knew nothing but love up until this point. But this darker half, aka Lavrina, would occasionally slip out. This also explains why Twyla's darker side is so tech-savvy, which was a key part of her introduction in the King's Bounty DLC, and this story, Descent of Darkness, as well. So while the real Lavrina is locked up, her evil schemes and thirst for destruction lives on in a fractured Twyla, with good Twyla being terrified of her darker half, especially after becoming aware of the fact she's nothing but a clone of her. And yes, Odin was aware that young Twyla was an experiment and clone when rescuing her, but that's part of the reason he wanted to give her a good life and loving family. Anyways, Michael and Rui are shocked to discover this, but realize this is why the Shadow Leader of the new reformed Team Cypher would be foolish enough to work alongside Twyla, because this leader needed her, as Lavrina's work is essential to their plan and the creation of Shadow Warp Pokemon, and probably to this device that attracts the Shadow Pokemon as well, as once again she did help create the Shadow Slayer's blueprints, which are two sides of the same coin with this device. So in a sense, she is the real brains of the operation. Michael, however, is both heartbroken and furious as the HQ lab is burnt down, and this also doubled as his family's home. Luckily, his family weren't there at the time of the incident, and Professor Crane made it out, but barely. But all of their work and what they were able to reconstruct of the Purify Chamber, and any hopes they had of restoring Zion's memories, are now lost. Michael and Rui command their Pokemon to attack Shadow Lugia in an epic cutscene where Shadow Lugia takes on their Pokemon, as Michael and Rui watch helplessly as their Pokemon are defeated one by one. Michael is also hurt as Lugia not that long ago was his Pokemon. After destroying the lab, dropping this bombshell, and wiping the floor with them, Twyla flies away on her Shadow Lugia, laughing maniacally. Meanwhile, back in the Orre Desert, Zion and Namid are suffering from their own defeat as Shadow Deoxys managed to escape their trap. But Namid is convinced her father Chatham can use the data collected from this encounter to perfect their tech for the next one. After making their way through the rest of the desert and snagging some Shadow Pokemon, you'd make your way to Isola Town late at night, where you and Namid, exhausted, plan to crash before heading back to Phoenix City. But first, you plan to snag the Shadow Gengar that resides there. Isola is an abandoned Midwest-inspired ghost town, which apparently has been abandoned since the Shadow virus first arrived on the Cosmic Meteorite, as another Shadow Warp Pokemon, Shadow Gengar, tormented the town, scaring everyone off.
Next, representing the most relatable of the 7 sins, envy. Let's face it, we've all had that ugly green monster show its face at some point or another, and have someone we are or have been jealous of. Well, I chose to make a shadow form for the literal shadow Pokemon Gengar to represent envy, as I feel it would be jealous of Clefable, being as it's its shadow. Which is why this shadow form looks even more like a Clefable, as this Shadow Gengar possessed and essentially merged with a poor innocent Clefable. With its design now featuring Clefable's wings, tail, and hair swirl, accompanied by the classic creepy Gengar face, and even a darker color scheme as it is now pitch black versus purple. Its new stats also take some slight inspiration from Clefable's, as it has much higher HP than Gengar, and its signature move Shadow Light is also a reference to Clefable's commonly used move Metronome, as it uses its finger in the same sense to execute this move. It's also a reference to Clefable's connection to the moon, as the attack uses Moonlight to obliterate the foe, and like Metronome, the outcome is unpredictable, as it will lower one of the target's stats at random. The fact it lowers one of the foe's stats is also to represent the fact it's envious of them, as let's face it, most people only try to tear down those they are envious of.
Shadow Gengar, since having the town to itself, is bored. That is until the two of you show up. But once again, you're not the only ones after the Shadow Pokemon. Cypher member and Cowboy Boone appears as he's once again been tasked to snag the Shadow Pokemon, with no more room left for failure after failing to snag Shadow Milotic in the last chapter. So you'd have one last showdown against Boone in the barren streets of this ghost town. He even has another Shadow Pokemon in the form of Shadow Lokix for you to snag. Unlike your previous battles against this gunslinger, this one would not be a double battle. Afterwards, Boone, unable to go back to his employer after a third failure, with his family's safety on the line, will tell you everything you need to hear in the town's empty saloon, where you'd each heal up your Pokemon and have a nice chat. During this time, he'll tell you Team Cypher's next meeting place in Celebi Town, at some sort of beach resort, saying that's all he can tell you for his and his family's safety, but you can't trust anyone or anything until you get your memories back, and that he must leave and make it to his family before it's too late, as they will have to seek hiding until the smoke settles, but he is now obviously rooting for you at this point, because he's pretty much a dead man otherwise. He then says you're not all that bad for a hunk of metal as he walks out of the saloon and tips his hat to you and your evolutions, petting Drekion, who actually leans into it, and giving Mummyon's tail a firm handshake. But Big Tough Boone lets out a scream after getting outside and being startled by Shadow Gengar. Boone will then throw out their Gauchiro, with the Scrappy ability allowing them to attack Ghost-type Shadow Gengar, while a scared Namid will hide under a table, saying she loves aliens but she does not do ghosts. In this boss battle within this creepy ghost town, within the dead of night beneath the full moon, you'd have various action commands as you chase Shadow Gengar in and out the various buildings within this town, as Gengar would phase room to room as you chase it through these creepy dark buildings, avoiding any holes in the floor as some of these buildings are falling apart. During this battle, Boone and Gauchiro will be assisting you during the fight in the auto attack sections and some of the action command sections as well. But Shadow Gengar will also have help as it calls upon other ghost-type Pokemon as they try to attack you and scare you away. In the barren streets, you'd have to contend with Rolling Bramblin and an abrasive Bramblegast trying to strike you down, and making it hard to get to Shadow Gengar in the auto attack sections of the battle. In the jailhouse, you'd have a Dusclops lock you in one of the jail cells after being lured there by Shadow Gengar, and you wouldn't be able to escape until defeating it and its goons being a bunch of Duskull. In the saloon, you'd have a Poltegeist and several Sinisty causing chaos in the abandoned establishment, as the action commands would have Boone's Cacturn shooting needles at the possessed glassware Pokemon. And in the dark and dusty library, you'd chase Gengar as it would phase through all the bookshelves, as you'd make your way through the library with several Litwick illuminating the space with the Chandelure ready to burn the place down, as it would catch all of the bookshelves on fire as you'd have to put out the flames using the action commands as Boone's Mudstill would stomp the flames out. After chasing Shadow Gengar into an old hotel, you'd have to battle a restless Streamin, accompanied by a nightmarish horde of Kamara, until hitting the action commands and breaking through the window and jumping back down onto the streets, where the rest of the battle would commence. This time, with the horde of wild Limbu popping out of the ground, trying to grab at you so you can't reach Shadow Gengar and drag you down. Once weakening Shadow Gengar enough, it will call upon the power of the full moon to unleash a big attack in the form of an orb of bright shadow-infused light it hurls at you, but if you hit the last action command in time, Galchiro will be able to swing its lasso tail and grab hold of its orb and fling it right back at the unsuspecting Gengar, allowing both Mummyon and Drekion each to lunge off the side of 2 buildings in order to finish Gengar off and end the battle, allowing you to snag it. And after doing so, there would be a scene of all the Ghost-type Pokemon helping Shadow Gengar hunt this town as they disappear. And shortly afterwards, Boone will ride off into the darkness as well. As Namid tries to say now that the ghost Pokemon are gone, they can finally find one of these buildings to sleep in so they can get a nice rest for what's to come. Zion says they don't really need to sleep, but they will happily guard over Namid as she does. After waking up the next day, Zion and Namid would make their way through the bottom half of the desert on their way back to Phoenix City, but on their way, they would stumble into an excavation site where they would meet a young archaeologist and rock-type specialist, Rex, who has a special fixation on fossil Pokemon. Hardworking but hot-headed, Rex knows exactly what he wants and goes after it. He is often accompanied by his partner Pokemon, a scrappy Tyrant, who he is often seen chasing after as it's constantly getting itself into trouble. This is a real problem when they are exploring underground tunnels or chambers, as Tyrant has a habit of touching things it's not supposed to. Think Abu and Aladdin. Without missing a beat, Rex will challenge you to a Pokemon battle as you're trespassing onto this excavation site, with his team consisting of several fossil Pokemon, including the 2 fossil Pokemon from my first Fakemon region, the Luika region. Rex fell in love with the excavation of fossils and ancient artifacts after assisting his grandfather on many explorations throughout the Luika region. His grandfather Douglas, also a rock-type specialist, has refurbished the abandoned gym, recently becoming a gym leader in the Luika region, replacing Winda and Winter after their move to the Firan region. But more on that later in my Luika-focused videos, coming to this channel pretty soon actually. Starting with Pokemon Legends Elamage, which is a project exploring the ancient past of the Luika region. Now back to the Orre region. This is Rex's first excavation in a foreign region on his own since his grandfather took the position of gym leader, so he's looking to really impress him while excavating the Orre region's arid deserts. However, the dark contagion found on the nearby meteorite has seemed to somehow revived all of the uncovered fossils and infected them, making for some Jurassic Shadow Pokémon. Helpless without a snag machine, Zion offers Rex and his team assistance in stopping these unruly Shadow Pokemon before all of the excavation team's hard work is destroyed and any of them are hurt. Namid says they don't have a lot of time as they don't know when Cypher will execute their plan and they need to intercept their next meeting in Celebi City, but Zion tells her they can't let innocents get hurt on their watch, so she agrees to help, as the 3 of them would try to round up all these Shadow Pokemon rampaging through the excavation site, many of which would make a great addition to your team, so get your snag machine ready. After finding one of these Shadow Pokemon, there would be a cutscene of it causing damage in the site, with Namid and Rex bickering as you all try to stop them. Namid and Rex, both being so young, would fight like kids at the playground, constantly trying to one-up the other and hurling childish insults at the other, while Zion tries their best to tune them both out and get the job done. After snagging all of these frenzied fossil Pokemon and saving the site, Rex will thank you before getting into one more spat with Namid, while Drekion, after proving itself to be a hopeless romantic in the last chapter with Glaceon, will nudge into Namid, pushing her closer to Rex, trying to make them kiss. Mummyon will use its hand-like tail to pull Drekion back, but then laugh alongside it. Namid and Rex, however, don't seem to find it as funny as they continue to bicker, so Zion, Mummyon, and Drekion will slowly walk into the distance without Namid, who is too busy arguing to even notice. But she'll meet up with you back at Phoenix City, where they will catch up with Michael and Rui about everything that happened at the lab. Namid will try to comfort Michael as she knows he also lost his home in this fire, and Michael and Rui are about to come clean to Zion about their lost memories and the whereabouts of West, but before they can, they all get an alert that Deoxys is on the move heading towards Celebi City, which, given what they know about Cypher's plans, can't be a coincidence, so Zion rushes after it, thinking it could lead them to the device that attracts the Shadow Virus. Michael and Rui look at each other, both relieved and a little nervous after Zion rushes out. Namid, not reading the room, interfering with the shared glance, asking if they have anything to eat. So your next stop would be Celebi City, a new beach town and resort I added to the Orre region, filled with plenty of new Shadow Pokemon for you to snag along the beach. After exploring this bustling beach town, you'd go into one of the resorts, trying to seek out any signs of Team Cypher, as you look for clues. And in doing so, you'll end up crossing paths with a fan-favorite character from both of the previous installments in the Orre region's games, Mirror B. a character I know a lot of you have been anticipating the arrival of in this story. Mirror B, while still the same energetic baddie, has turned a new leaf. Well, kind of, as he was able to use his fame in the Orre region to keep him from being indicated with Dr. Greevil, Lavrina, and the rest of Team Cypher at the end of Gale of Darkness, as his loyal fans created a petition to plead for his innocence and keep him out of jail. Having retired from a life of crime since Cypher's defeat, Mirror B, using his previous earnings, has built his own beach resort in Celebes City. It is here he has his own nightclub, where he makes sure to make a cameo at every night with his sweet dance moves. As loud and flamboyant as ever, Mirror B's Pokemon battling skills are just as impressive as his dance moves. Now that Cypher has been reformed under new leadership, he's no longer an admin, as he'd rather live a peaceful, stress-free life of partying. But Mirror B still works for the new Cypher group, using his connections at his club and resort to gather intel and allowing the group to conduct private business meetings outside of some shady, more obvious locations such as the Under. Although he leaves the dirty work to all of his grunts and avoids getting involved as much as possible. That is, until he discovers the Shadow Slayer has shown up at his resort, in which case he will call in some Cypher grunts to send after Zion. After you defeat these grunts, Mirror B decides he must take matters into his own hands, and will give you a private show in the form of a high-stakes Pokemon battle on the club's dance floor. Mirror B having an updated team, of course consisting of his infamous Ludicolo, but only one this time. Instead, he has plenty of other musical amphibian-esque Pokemon to make some noise, including a Shadow Toxtricity for you to snag. After defeating Mirror B, he will try to boogie out of there as quickly as possible, as he seems to be scared of being dragged any further into Team Cypher's plans, as he's living this nice cushy life, but ends up spilling the beans, telling you exactly what they were discussing while last at the club. Apparently they are planning to leave from Gadion Port to Citadark Isle, with lots of precious cargo on board. He's not sure what it is, but he keeps insisting that's all he knows and to please leave him out of it, as he has a performance tonight he's been really jazzed for. Zion walks away, and after he leaves the room, Mirror B will talk to his background dancers as he tells them he's glad he's gone so they can get back to rehearsal, as he continues to dance, seemingly unbothered by everything that just happened. That is until Drekion sneaks back into the room and uses its move Scale Shot to cut down the disco ball above Mirror B's head as it bonks him over the head, and Drekion struts away out of the room back to Zion's side. So that's where you go next, to the iconic location of Gadion Port, found in both Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, so I had to include it in this chapter as well. Gadion Port being a lively seaport city with active trade along its docks. Loitering sailors are a common sight as ships come and go. It is also home to one of Mirror B's old venues, the Krabby Club, from the previous games, which is a bar featuring performing acts, where you will go for information as you try to track down Team Cypher. One of the patrons you talk to will even mention Mirror B, saying they used to watch him perform here, but now he thinks he's too cool for a dump like this, only performing at his prissy high-end club resort. In the past, Citadark Isle could be reached from here by Robo-Kyogre, but Robo-Kyogre is not featured in this game, so instead you will be sneaking on one of Team Cypher's cargo ships to get there, but not before being spotted by Hothead admin Gonzap, who will challenge you to a Pokemon battle on the docks. Gonzap is another character from the previous games who Zion has already battled on this adventure, but Gonzap will have an updated team of tough Pokemon in this battle, including a Shadow Electros for you to snag. After defeating him, you'd be able to sneak on board before the ship takes off, as Mamion and Drekion would push him into the water so he couldn't stop you. While on board this cargo ship, you'd have to avoid and even battle even more Team Cypher grunts as you're spotted, but your time at sea will face rough waters as Shadow Deoxys comes crashing down onto the ship with its sights set on the Shadow Slayer, Zion. Still in its bulky defense form, you'd battle Shadow Deoxys out at sea as a storm rages, rocking the ship amongst the rough ocean waves throughout this battle, as you'd have to avoid cargo boxes as they slide and even fall all over the deck of the ship as it's beaten in the storm. So the ground and battlefield will be very inconsistent and shaky throughout this battle. These conditions will set up a lot of your cinematic action commands, as you and your evolutions would have to avoid this shuffling cargo and falling overboard as the ship is thrown around in the storm. Midway through the battle, after further inspecting one of the broken cargo containers, Zion will discover the special cargo being shipped on board is a bunch of snag machines that Cypher plans to sell to further their plans of world domination after attracting even more meteorites with this dark contagion on it that creates Shadow Pokémon. So they can sell these snag machines to the highest bidders in order to monopolize the chaos, and use these powerful Shadow Pokémon to do their bidding. But the second half of the battle, after weakening Defense Form Deoxys, will take you inside the ship, as there will be an action command dodging one of Shadow Deoxys' attacks, and in doing so, that attack will create a massive hole in the ship as water starts rushing in, and you then have to try to make it out of the ship before it sinks, while battling an angry Shadow Deoxys in the rising water. The fact that it is in its sturdy defense form makes it even harder for you to harm and get around Deoxys, so in addition to the turn-based style sections of battle, a timer will appear on the screen in the auto attack sections, and if you don't defeat Deoxys before the timer runs out, you automatically lose the battle and will sink to the bottom of the ocean on this cargo ship. So I hope you have a team of your toughest Pokemon before boarding the ship, as you'll need it in order to pierce Shadow Deoxys' seemingly impenetrable defenses, with your only chance of doing so outside the traditional turn-based sections being within the action commands that pop up, as your auto attacks will do little to no damage against Defense Form Deoxys. The final action command will have Drakion use all of its might to force Shadow Deoxys down the flooded hallway in the ship, before swimming up the staircase to the deck of the ship, where Mummion will use its bandages to lock the cabin door, locking Deoxys inside as it floods and seemingly drowns, allowing Zion and Mummion and Drakion to quickly look for a way off before going down with the ship as well. Zion will finally find one last escape boat as a Team Cypher grunt is rushing to it, before the boat is hit by a massive wave and they end up going flying off the ship, allowing Zion and their evolutions to get on the lifeboat where they will have to brave the storm. In doing so, they will watch what's left of the ship go under, but shortly afterwards they will watch Shadow Deoxys, once again in its original form, come bursting out of the water. Luckily it doesn't spot Zion before turning back into its speed form and bursting away. Thinking the coast is clear, Zion would be able to spot Cidadark Isle off in the distance as they slowly drift towards it. After arriving on Cidadark Isle, you'd encounter many ruthless dark and fire-type Pokemon for you to snag. Cidadark Isle is a volcanic island and the headquarters of Cypher in the second game Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, surrounded by strong currents which are artificially created by Cypher to repel would-be intruders. Currents which Zion probably wouldn't have been able to survive if they were human, but luckily being made of titanium and other strong metals, they were able to make it out unscathed. I think it's safe to assume he put Mummion and Drakion back in their Pokeballs so they'd be safe from these rough currents. Anyways, the island has a massive dome in the crater of a volcano. There is also a labyrinth of lava rooms, caves, puzzles within the previous game, which would make a return in this one as well, as you'd have to face numerous Cypher grunts before making it to the summit of the volcano, where the dark device that attracts Shadow Pokemon and this dark contagion seems to be located. So obviously Zion wants to destroy this device, as it is key to Cypher's plans, as they try to make their way to the top of the volcano to do exactly that. But before getting to do so, they hear an alarm go off as a mechanical door slowly opens, revealing a berserk Shadow Warp Pokemon, Shadow Cookatrix, being the corrupted Shadow Warp version of one of my own Fakemon from the Furin region, as I already have represented one of my Fakemon from my first Fakemon region, the Luika region, in the form of Shadow Treasure in the first chapter. The last Shadow form and of the 7 deadly sins is Wrath, represented by my Furin Pokemon, Cookatrix, inspired by the monstrous rooster-like dragon, which is featured within the Bible and various mythology, the Cockatrix, as this beast is said to cause destruction, and that, paired with its fire dragon typing, I felt fit the idea of Wrath really well. Its normal form is golden, as it also takes inspiration from the golden rooster from Norse mythology. However, this shadow form, like most of the others, is now black with ominous purple flames and tethered wings, as it would be a force to be reckoned with, especially with its new and improved stats, and its destructive new signature shadow move, Shadow Wrath, which works just like Outrage, as it's an incredibly powerful attack used in a frenzy until causing confusion. This boss battle would easily be one of the most challenging within Pokemon Descent of Darkness XD, as its immense power and speed truly make it a worthy representative of the Sin Wrath. So a no longer caged Shadow Cookatrix would be on a rampage, charging at you, breaking through the glass dome, knocking you out onto the volcano where this heated boss battle would take place. as you'd have to dodge Shadow Cookatrix's fiery and fierce attacks consisting of fire blasts and razor-sharp claw swipes, as well as vicious bites with its long neck, as it tries to push you into the pools and rivers of lava coursing through the battlefield, which would do damage to you and your Pokemon or automatically end the battle, although hitting the cinematic action command buttons would allow you to knock it into the lava, but being a fire type, it would emerge from the magma with a vengeance, with its attacks being even swifter and deadlier than before. After weakening its health into the yellow, the fight would make its way back into Cypher's headquarters, as you'd be able to once again lock it up in its cage, closing the door to its chamber, hitting another button as gallons of water would pour down onto it, seemingly finishing it off, as you'd open the mechanical door and steam would come rushing out into the lab space as you'd be able to snag the last of the 7 Shadow Warp Pokemon, and after doing so, make your way to the top of the volcano to destroy this device before Team Cypher can use it to execute the next stage of their plan. After getting into an elevator which will take Zion to the top of the volcano where the device is located, Zion will contact Rui and Michael to tell them he has found the device and plans to destroy it. Rui begs Zion to be careful and is about to tell him something important, but before she can, the doors to the elevator open, revealing none other than the hero of the first game, Pokemon Coliseum, Wes, on the other side of them, as he has seemed to beat Zion to the punch. Zion, shocked to see Wes and instantly recognizing him, as they do share memories, ends the call as he will start to short circuit again as more of his memories start to rush in. And while Mummion and Drekion would normally be worried as this is happening, during this time, Mummion will run to embrace Espeon, as Drekion does the same to embrace Wes's Umbreon. Wes smiles and pets them both, as he then slowly approaches Zion, happy to see him, as he puts his hand firmly on their shoulder, snapping Zion out of their malfunction, saying, "Good job. I knew you'd find your way back to me." Zion, acting as if he's seen a ghost, snaps back and says, "Let's finish this once and for all," ready to destroy the device, as Wes grins and nods, as all 4 evolutions make their way into position ready to strike. But before they do, Zion quickly uses his scanner on the device to see what they're working with, but is shocked after discovering that this can't be the real dark device, as it doesn't contain any of the dark energy used to attract the dark contagion or Shadow Pokemon. Confused, Zion turns off his scanner, prepared to share this discovery with Wes. For being able to do so, Wes will violently thrust the fist of his snag machine right into an unsuspecting Zion's chest, ripping out his core, as he looks at it and then gives an evil grin before saying, "You walked right into my trap," pushing Zion into the volcano below, with his lifeless robotic body landing right on a ledge beside a pool of lava that seems to be slowly inching closer and closer to him. Mummion and Drekion, shocked, lunge back and growl at Wes, as they loved Zion, but Wes will then remind them who they really belong to. "Mummion, Drekion, welcome home, my friends." As Umbreon and Espeon rub up against the base of his legs, and Mummion and Drekion, terrified, look at each other, unsure what to do, as their lifeless master, Zion, lies down below in the pit of the volcano.
When darkness descends from the sky, evil will rise and spread across the land. There isn't a heart that doesn't harbor evil, especially in the midst of chaos. So, let's create a warrior without the Shadow Pokémon.
In the last chapter, we left off at yet another cliffhanger, as the hero from the first game, Wes, finally appeared, but ended up betraying the hero of this game, Zion, ripping out his core, the key to the shadow summoning device, and hurling Zion's lifeless robotic body off the dome into the volcano, where it was to be engulfed by the rising lava. As Wes revealed himself as the Shadow Master of Neo Team Cypher, pulling all of the strings so far. Now, for those of you who played Pokemon Coliseum, you may not be too surprised that Wes, being a former protagonist, ended up being the villain for 2 reasons. The first being he started the first game as a villain, part of Team Snag'em. He may have been the protagonist, but he was never really a hero. He betrayed Team Snag'em and not only stole the Snag Machine for himself, for reasons unknown, but literally blew up their base of operations at the start of the game and drove off cheesing. That's pretty cold. I mean, just look at that evil grin, come on. And although his motives for joining Team Snag'em in the first place and once again stealing the Snag Machine were never really revealed, it's not a good look, so I thought I'd give him some backstory to fill in the blanks. That being said, I won't reveal all of his motives quite yet, as this will be explored more in this chapter throughout his actions. But it's also important to note that the ambiguity of his actions in the first games may be because the original creator of the series has stated since that he originally planned to make Wes the final villain for the sequel, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, but couldn't because Game Freak told him that making the previous hero a villain would be too dark for a Pokemon game. But decades later, the series has gotten more mature with its audience and tackled a lot darker issues such as morality and even death. So I don't think that would be an issue today, and in the creators' defense, the Orre Region's games were always more mature in nature than the mainstream games of the time, so I think they could have easily gotten away with it back in the day. But that's speculated to be the reason why Wes and Rui were both missing from the sequel Gale of Darkness, because they were removed from the game so late because of this decision. But there's even a team found within the data for the game for a final boss that hinted at Wes's return, and looks like it could have been his team, so I decided to give him that team for this game, as I wanted to follow through with the creator's original plan for the character and put my own twist on it to try to justify his actions and flesh his character out even more. Anyways, back to the story. After hurling Zion into the volcano crater, Wes assumed Zion's Pokemon, Mummion and Drekion, would respect him as their true owner. But fortunately, Mummion and Drekion aren't willing to do that, as they truly love Zion, robot or not. Mummion and Drekion make it clear that they are upset with Wes as they growl at him, but Umbreon and Espeon rush to Wes's defense. Before things escalate any further, Twyla appears from high above on Shadow Lugia. I have the key. We can finally move forward into the final phase of our plan. As he holds up Zion's core.
Looks like your little puppet will no longer be a thorn in our side. It's a shame. He would have made a real asset if you'd have given me the chance to reprogram him.
It's too risky. He has already gone against his coding. There was something far too human within him.
And that scares you, doesn't it? Because it is a reminder of the humanity within you. That is where it comes from after all, isn't it?
Make no mistake, Twyla. My humanity doesn't scare me, but I have worked far too hard to let it blind me from what must be done.
You know she will come looking for him. For you. Are you ready for that?
Let her come. She had her chance to fight alongside me and she rejected me. But she can't stop me. No one can. Now let's go before this place goes up in flames.
Oh, goody. You know I love a good fireworks show.
Twyla Giddy jumps up and down joyfully, clapping her hands, before getting on the back of Shadow Lugia. Wes slowly starts walking over to Shadow Lugia, as if he's about to get on it as well.
Oh, were you expecting a ride? Sorry, boss, but I'm no one's chauffeur.
You have to be joking. No one respects or would ever trust you like they do me. You need me just as much as I need you if you plan to conquer.
That's where you're wrong. World domination was always your plan. I'm far more interested in destroying it. Toodaloo!
Twyla then flies away on Shadow Lugia, leaving Wes and Zion's robotic corpse for dead. As moments later, the lab on Dark Isle is seen exploding off in the distance, while Twyla is soaring through the sky towards the screen with an evil smirk on her face. The screen then cuts to a cutscene of Michael and Rui watching the explosion on TV, worried about Zion. Michael then goes to check in with Zion, only to find his signal has disappeared completely, worrying them even more. Michael, in shock, then looks closer at the screen to see Twyla in the sky off in the distance on Shadow Lugia, still upset that his Shadow Lugia betrayed him, saying Twyla had to have been behind this, and then Rui says that she couldn't have done this alone, that Wes must have been involved. Michael then says to Rui that they should have warned Zion about Wes a lot sooner. Maybe they could have prevented this, but Rui says that they tried many times, which if you look back they actually did, they were just interrupted. But they were just too worried that he'd glitch out again and revert to his initial evil programming, because if he knew the truth and had all of Wes's memories flood back in, he would most likely want to follow through with Wes's plans. Which makes even more sense now that you know that Wes has been leading Neo Team Cypher all along, and Zion had his memories. Hence why they were so hesitant to tell him the truth after he started glitching. Starting to panic, Rui asks Michael what can they do now. Michael says continue to fight, because there's not much else they can do. There would then be a short scene of Twyla arriving at Neo Team Cypher's headquarters, strutting in as she owns a place, barking orders, because she's now in charge. Gonzap asks who died to make her queen, and she then turns and responds,
Why, Wes, of course. May he rest in pieces.
Gonzap, unsure what to say and somewhat scared of her, asks why she thinks he would take orders from the likes of her, and then she throws out Shadow Lugia. Gonzap then falls into line as she then says everything will continue as planned, and that she wants to continue with the final step of their operation, but before being able to do so, they need Shadow, as the Totem Corporation's tech plays a vital role in this plan.
So Twyla tells Gonzap and the Cypher Goons to make themselves useful and orders them to bring Chatham to her. The game would then cut to a quick cutscene of Chatham and Namid in Totem Tower working together on a new and improved device to try to capture Shadow Deoxys after the last one failed in the desert. They're even laughing and having some good bonding, despite Namid still being upset with her father for being involved with Neo Team Cypher, but he appears to try to be making up for it. This family moment, however, is interrupted by Cowboy Boone, who barges in. Namid asks what Boone is doing here, as she last saw him in Isola Town after working together with Zion to defeat Shadow Gengar, and he said he was planning on leaving Neo Cypher and hiding out with his family until the coast was clear. Boone then claims he had every intention of doing so, but can't live like that, on the run, always looking over his shoulder. It wouldn't be fair to his family. So he claims he has them hiding away somewhere safe, but rather than hiding, he wants to help fight and stop Neo Cypher from seeing their plan of world domination through. A plan that, much like Chatham, he wasn't truly aware of when agreeing to help Neo Cypher, because he too was manipulated by Wes. So Namid, having told Boone back in Isola Town that her father Chatham was also manipulated and even threatened by Neo Cypher, inspired Boone to try to team up with Chatham, as together they may be able to stop them from within, as they must know something between the two of them they don't want them knowing. And now that you know that Wes is the leader of Neo Team Cypher, I think it makes sense that people as good as Chatham and Boone would side with him or believe his lies, because Wes was probably seen as a hero after the events of the first game, Pokemon Coliseum, because he seemingly saved the region and stopped Team Cypher. So I'm sure most people in the Orre region would assume him to be a hero. And he also managed to convince Rui to help him in the first game because he needed her aura reading abilities despite his affiliations with Team Snag'em and having stolen their tech. I mean, if you ask me, the dude always looked kind of shady, so the girl clearly likes a bad boy, but I think for someone like that to have people follow him so blindly, they must have some sort of charisma to them, so I imagine that being the case for Wes. He probably comes off as a real nice guy despite his tough exterior, and once that nice guy act wears off, I see him threatening people, as he clearly did both Chatham and Boone's families later on in their operations, as once again he has also proved himself to be quite powerful after single-handedly defeating both Team Snag'em and Cypher in the first game. So I can see why people would be scared of him. Anyways, this conversation between Chatham and Boone is cut short as Cypher Goons start barging in to the lab after them, telling them that Twyla has requested to see them both to continue with the next phase of their plan. Chatham then says he doesn't work for them anymore, in which case Namid, proud of her father, says take that. Gonzap then walks in and says that Twyla said if they weren't willing to comply, they would have to take them by force. Boone says good luck with that, pointing his poker pistol at them. Namid then says that this is all very cool and all, but they're kind of outnumbered and cornered, which is the case. So Chatham then takes the screwdriver out of her hand and throws it through the lab window, breaking it, before letting out his bravery as all of them hop on board and fly out of the Totem Tower. Gonzap then throws out his Skarmory and goes flying after them through Neo Quinny City, flying through the streets and past the various skyscrapers in an epic aerial cutscene, until Chatham, who obviously knows the city like the back of his hand, is able to make a sharp turn and hide away, escaping them. The game would then cut back to Michael and Rui in Phoenix City as they assume the worst, as they still can't get hold of Zion as he is completely off the grid. They then hear a knock at the door, and it turns out to be none other than Champion Odin from the Furin region. Obviously knowing who he is, Rui asks what he's doing here. As she's surprised, she doesn't know him, and he responds saying I found a couple stragglers as Mummyon and Drekion run in excitement to see her. She is really confused and then asks where Zion is, but before she can really finish her sentence, Wes appears with Zion's lifeless corpse in his arms. She looks as if she's seen a ghost before really paying attention to Zion, who has a giant hole in his chest, asking if Twyla did this, and Wes then replies saying no, I did. Rui says she doesn't understand, and Michael asks if that's the case, then why is he here? Wes then says he isn't here by choice. He explains before Citydark Isle blew up. Shortly after Twyla flew off on Shadow Lugia, Champion Odin appeared from the sky with Idlodin as he was looking for Twyla, because as most of you know, who watched my King's Bounty DLC video for the Furin region, Champion Odin is her grandfather and adopted Twyla, and he's been looking for her ever since she betrayed him and ran off at the end of the Furin saga. Well, just missing her and discovering the dire circumstances, Odin and Idlodin rescued both Wes and Zion's corpse, as he was just gonna rescue Wes, but Mummyon and Drekion, worried, directed Odin to the volcano's pit, urging them to save Zion as well.
Wes, with no other options, our time had no choice but to comply and go with Odin, who obviously flew here to Phoenix City. Rui then puts Zion's body down and gets up and pushes Wes, furious at him, saying he has no right to be here and to leave. As the previous chapter suggested, there was a fallout between the two of these characters, and if you actually go back and watch the previous chapters, a lot of you presumed Wes to be dead because of the language and wording I used, or Rui or Michael used rather, when talking about Wes, because they wanted to avoid Zion finding out the truth and reverting back to his previous programming. But, that wording, if you listen carefully, actually foreshadows this. Basically, he was dead to Rui because he betrayed her. She found out his true intentions, and that he used her for her abilities in the first game, why he really stole the Snag Machine and took down Team Snag'em and Cypher, because like the original creators hinted at for the direction they were going to go in the sequel, they said it was more about power for Wes, so it would be the same case for this story. He just really wanted power. And that's actually why he was gone and missing for the events of Gale of Darkness, because he was actually leading Team Cypher all the way back then from the shadows, not Grievel. The whole Grievel thing was a setup, so he can continue to operate Team Cypher from the shadows, without any suspicion, which is my way of explaining why he wasn't in the second game and everything that's gone on between now and then. So Rui found out, she felt betrayed, because obviously she thought they were really close friends, they went through an adventure together, and I think we've all assumed that there was kind of like a romantic thing going on between the two, so this had to have really hurt her. And as Wes mentioned in the first scene, he did offer her to join him because he did actually care about her, and her abilities are very useful as she can see Shadow Pokémon, but obviously she's a very good person and she couldn't comply with such a scheme, which is why she feels like he is dead to her, and things ended like they did between the two of them. But Wes then says, like it or not, Twyla has Zion's core, which is the key to her plan, and she will continue this plan without him. They're running out of time and have to stop her. Michael, once again confused, says he doesn't understand, isn't this still his plan? Weston tells him that she betrayed him, and plans to finish what she started in the Furin Saga and destroy the world now rather than dominate it. Rui, upset with Wes, chuckles, saying, oh well, she used you, implying she used him, saying that's what Wes did to her. And then she says, how could you trust someone so outwardly two-faced, saying the name says it all. Champion Odin, however, chimes in saying there's no time for jokes or bickering, that Twyla is dangerous. Michael asks how he knows that, in which case Champion Odin tells him that he is her grandfather, and Michael says he thought she was a Laverina clone because she told him that in one of the previous chapters, and Odin will quickly say that he is aware of that, and that he adopted her, trying to give her a better life, in which case Rui says, yeah, look how well that turned out for everyone. Also, for those of you familiar with the Furin Saga, you're probably wondering why Champion Odin has the divine and omniscient Pokemon Elodin still, despite now belonging to the Furin protagonist Eric, and the reason is because Eric, knowing Odin was searching for Twyla, lent him Elodin one last time for this journey, so he could not only find her, but stop her once and for all. Michael then tries to take a look at Zion's robotic corpse, seeing if he can fix him. Wes, seeing that Rui clearly wants to hash things out, says not here and to meet him alone at the Orre Coliseum. Michael asks if she's comfortable doing that, and she nods her head saying she can handle him. Michael then says he'll do his best to repair Zion, but Wes tells him there's no hope without the core. Michael then reminds Wes that he's been able to surpass Wes's expectations for the Shadow Slayer bot before when he programmed Wes's humanity into it, something that no one thought was possible, and to not underestimate him. Wes and Rui then leave, and Michael tells her to be careful and not to trust a word he says. Odin then tells Michael he plans to continue looking for Twyla, but before he leaves, Chatham, Namid, and Boone appear on Bravery, saying that they're running out of time. Neo Cypher is making their big move, in which case Michael responds, saying they already know. Namid, then noticing Champion Odin, starts by saying who is this guy, before realizing who he is and fangirling over him, asking for his autograph, in which case her father Chatham will tell her now is not the time. She will then ask why he's here, in which case Michael will say it's a long story, but at the same time Odin will respond saying he's her grandfather, in which case Namid will gasp and say, oh, so the plot thickens. Michael asks what Boone is doing here, as last time he checked he was one of the bad guys, and Namid will then say he's here to help. Michael then asks Chatham, as head of Totem Corporation, what the next step of their plan entails. Chatham says he's unsure where the Shadow device is located. He was never disclosed that information, but the Totem Corporation was tasked to build a Robo Rayquaza like the Robo Kyogre and Groudon in the first game. And this Robo Rayquaza was built in order to travel to space. So considering that Twyla and Neo Team Cypher need him for the next phase of their plan, it would make sense if they were hiding it in the Totem Corporation space station, as they need his code in order to activate Robo Rayquaza. In which case Namid, shocked and excited, says, we have a space station? As she is obsessed with space, and is probably wondering why her father never told her that.
Boone says that sounds about right, but from what he was told, the final phase would take place on top of the infamous Mount Battle, so that must be where Robo Rayquaza is located, and they plan to launch from. Chatham says that certainly would make sense, but Boone says that the mountain will be swarming with Cypher grunts, so they need to be prepared to fight. Michael says if that's the case, they will need Zion's help, as they are the one who's defeated all the Shadow Warp Pokemon and Cypher so far, and if that anyone can stop them, it's Zion, as they also share Wes's memories, so if they can manage to get those back, they'll know everything they need to know to foil their plans. Boone says that's true, but they're running out of time, and then if that's the case, he needs to hurry. Chatham then says that Robo Rayquaza isn't operational without his passcode, so they literally can't continue without him, so that should buy them enough time. Namid says if that's true, they need to get him somewhere safe, so Neo Cypher doesn't find him, as she offers to take him to the secret Fennec catacombs underneath Fennec City, as it will be safe there. Since no one really knows about these catacombs, which are a new location I created for this game, with a relic stone like the one Cypher destroyed in the Relic Cave, along with the Purify Chamber to prevent Shadow Pokemon from being purified, as their former plan for domination was dependent on the Shadow Virus running rampant through the region, so they profit off the sale of snag machines to criminal organizations worldwide. Chatham, unaware such a place exists, says that's a good idea. Boone says he will go with them, but Michael says he doesn't trust him, to wait here with him. Boone then tells Michael, listen Pipsqueak, you don't have to trust me, but don't tell me what to do, I'm done taking orders. Namid says not to worry, and they run off to the catacombs, agreeing to meet there as soon as Zion is operational again. Michael says he will make sure to bring Rui too after she finishes her business with Wes at the Orre Coliseum. Speaking of which, the game would then cut to the Orre Coliseum where Rui stumbles into the center of the stadium to meet Wes, the location being symbolic of the relationship and trials throughout the first game, Pokemon Coliseum, and somewhat poetic as they're now battling on opposite sides, and this is an arena. And they do exactly that here, as Wes says he understands she's upset with him, but he has always cared for her. That much was true, and he knows she cares for him too. That they have to put their differences aside and work together once more to stop Twyla. And then Rui says, and then what? You will give her the boot, take back your rightful place as Cypher leader, and continue with your original plan for world domination, even with all these lives at stake? Wes then gives her a little bit of his backstory, telling her why he is the way he is, and joined Team Snag'em in the first place. Something he's never told her before, so he's really opening up. Basically, he grew up in the Under, along with a bunch of criminals, and scrounging the streets, stealing things as that was the only way he could get by. And he was really good at it, but he was always viewed as trash or a lowlife. And he hated that. It made him angry as he didn't ask for this life. His skill set and anger led him to join Team Snag'em, as working for them made him feel powerful for once, as they were feared by most, even respected in a sense, which is all he ever really wanted, to be seen as someone special, or at least not a nobody. No one ever really made him feel that way until he met Rui, of course, which is what he tells her. But he's always had this thirst for power because of this, and the more power he got, the more he wanted, which is why he decided to steal the snag machine for himself and seek it out. Especially as he knew he could use this device to take over the Orre region by capturing all these Shadow Pokemon and even take down Cypher and look like a hero to the people of the Orre region. But all this fame and respect wasn't enough, as he originally thought it would be. So, he used this power to join Team Cypher, which was quite easy to do after his conquest in the first game, convincing Greevil he was calling all the shots and even going along with his plan, but hiding in the shadows, orchestrating their demise once again so he could rebuild the group under his control after most everyone thought Cypher was no longer a threat. That way the group could truly operate from the shadows until it was time to strike and unleash their plan. That's why Wes wasn't present for Gale of Darkness, and Twyla was a necessary part of his plan, as she was a Lavrina clone, and therefore one of Cypher's most valuable members, having created Shadow Lugia with her experiments and discovering the true extent of the Shadow Virus, even leading to the blueprint of the Shadow Slayer with her work. Rui at first was part of his plan due to her abilities, which is how he used her in the first game, as these abilities made her a big asset, but he really did value her and their time together, the closer they got, which is why he eventually told her the truth about his real plans, thinking that she would join him. But obviously she's a good guy and she could never stand for something like that, and she felt betrayed by him and even used by him, because he was lying to her all this time, and took advantage of her abilities to read aura, using them to help further his plan without her even knowing. So she couldn't help him any further, and obviously that's where their friendship fell apart, and why she said Zion is basically all that was left of him. Because the Wes she knew, the good guy, the hero, doesn't exist anymore, he's dead to her. Wes then says he understands she's upset, but now is not the time. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and we are on the same side here now, like it or not. If you and your friends don't want to work with me, please don't stand in my way. Rui then says she won't sit back this time, she will stop him, as she throws out her Lucario, in which case Wes throws out Espeon and Umbreon. But Zion's Mummyon and Drakion then release themselves from their Pokeballs on Wes's belt, but to Rui's side, as they want to fight alongside Rui now to avenge Zion. Wes, unamused, says suit yourselves, as Rui returns her Lucario to its Pokeball, and a tag battle between Wes and Rui with Umbreon and Espeon versus Mummyon and Drakion would commence. And you'd technically be playing as Rui. I thought this would be cool as no Pokemon game has ever let you switch perspectives and play as another character before, and this is now a common thing in various other video game franchises. Plus, it is still technically the same Mummyon and Drakion you started the game with your moveset, etc., so you're not exactly starting from scratch or changing that much. Anyways, after this battle, despite having more Pokemon on his team, and legendaries at that, Wes says he's had enough. He can't waste any more time, and that maybe in another life, they could still be friends. In which case, Rui replies saying he made his decision and he has to live with it. He clearly isn't the person she thought he was. Wes will then reply saying she knows him better than anyone else. She isn't sure what to do and tries to stop him, but he throws out a smoke bomb and manages to get away, as he presumably goes after Twyla on his own. Rui then calls Michael to check in and see how things are going with Zion. Michael says he managed to get him operational again, but he has none of his or Wes's memories now. He's been completely rebooted, but he says he can at least reprogram him to work on their side once again. But Wes was sadly right, without his core, there's no way of truly restoring him. Even if they could manage to get it back from Twyla, they have no way of stopping him without Wes's memories, which they have no way of recovering now. Let alone, would still have to wonder if regaining all of Wes's memories and knowing the truth would have Zion revert to his original programming and betray them. Rui obviously is really upset after hearing this, and Mummyon and Drakion, who are still out of their Pokeballs as well, as Rui goes to comfort them. Michael then says he wishes there was another way, but looks like they'll have to continue on without Zion, and then he tells her about the group's plans to meet in the Fennec Catacombs. Rui will then say, "That's it! The Fennec Catacombs, I have an idea," saying that the mythical Pokemon, the Wishmaker Jirachi, is said to live down there, granting people's wishes in times of need, as a nod to the fact that Celebi was associated with the Relic Stone in the Relic Cave in the other games. Rui says if they can somehow manage to find Jirachi in the Catacombs and plead to it to grant them a wish, they may be able to save Zion and stop Cypher. Michael says if and only if this crazy plan actually works, they will most likely only get one shot, so it better be one heck of a wish. She then confidently replies saying she knows exactly what to wish for. As they go to meet the team down in the Fennec Catacombs, where Namid, Chatham, and Boone are already waiting as they hide from Team Cypher. You'd actually play as a rebooted Zion in this section. With all your same Pokemon, Zion just wouldn't have their personality or any of their memories, so their movement in the overworld would be slower and more robotic as a result to represent this. And given the fact they still have a big gaping hole in their chest and damage done internally, despite Michael's best effort to patch it up, there would still be some glitching as well. Rui will then show up to inform them all of her plan involving Jirachi and using its wish-granting powers to help them stop Team Cypher. Odin, who's also here at this point, says it's quite risky, asking the divine and omniscient Pokemon Adlodin if that's possible, and Adlodin replies saying that it is indeed, but it will not be easy to find Jirachi. It doesn't often show itself, but given the dire circumstances, if it were to ever appear, now would be the time. Boone, however, thinks this is a ridiculous plan with too many what-ifs, in which case Rui says her aura reading abilities may actually be able to help them find it. Michael says that's a genius idea and that his and Zion's aura readers should do the trick as well, as the three of you agree to split up after Jirachi. Odin then says he's going to continue to mount battle to see if he can stop or at least talk any sense into Twyla on his own, as he leaves. You'd then search the catacombs for Jirachi, but then there would be a cutscene of Team Cypher barging into the catacombs, demanding Chatham to come with them, as Namid and Chatham are shocked that they managed to find them here, but willing to fight. However, Boone will then step in front of them, siding with Cypher, saying not to resist, revealing that he has actually been working with Cypher all along, and was only pretending otherwise to get closer to them and foil their plans of retaliation. But he says quite frankly he's not worried, as he thinks they're going on a wild goose chase, so they can have at it as long as it keeps them out of the way. Namid, hurt by his betrayal, says how could you? She thought he had really changed. And Boone says he is sorry, he really did have every intention of leaving Cypher, but before he could, Twyla found him and his family, and is holding them hostage, saying if he was scared of what Wes would do to them, that she promised she'd do far worse, and that he has to protect them at whatever cost. Chatham, obviously upset, says as a father he understands, and tells the mid he's sorry, but they can't take them themselves, and that they have to comply as he can't let anything happen to her. He'd never forgive himself, and then she replies saying if he does this, that she will never forgive him. Hurt by this, he stoically says that's a decision I'm gonna have to live with, my child, as he leaves with Team Cypher, and she starts crying begging him not to. But then Gonzap grabs her saying don't worry, you're coming with us as leverage, as they haul her away too. You'd then continue exploring the catacombs as a soulless Zion in search of Jirachi, but now also have to contend with and battle several Cypher grunts along the way, as they're clearly surprised to see the Shadow Slayer is up and running again after hearing it was destroyed, so they want to capture you and bring you back to Twyla. Rui and Michael will appear after defeating a couple of them, saying if they're here that means they most likely found Chatham, and that they're much closer to receiving the passcode to activate Robo Rayquaza, so they have to find him before it's too late. But before they leave, Soulless Zion will make a sound as their aura reader detects something, and Michael and Rui double check to see what's going on, as they detect a powerful aura, hoping it's Jirachi. And Rui says it can't be, as that's the aura of a Shadow Pokémon. But then, lo and behold, Jirachi does appear, but as a mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon. As Michael says, be careful what you wish for. Rui asks how that's possible if these catacombs are blocked off from people. Michael says just because people don't normally access these catacombs doesn't mean various Pokemon and the Dark Contagion couldn't make their way down here, especially with how fast it's spreading. They both agree that this obviously isn't good, and that if they have any chance of getting it to grant their wish, they have to first defeat and snag it, and then obviously use the relic stone inside these catacombs to purify it. Michael says luckily we still have a Shadow Slayer, as he kind of like puts his hand on Zion's shoulder, but Zion, obviously being a soulless robot at this point, doesn't really respond at all. But of course Michael keeps forgetting that. But Zion will then activate and eyes will go red as it wants to capture Shadow Jirachi anyways, as you'd once again play as Zion for this boss battle. Moving a lot slower in the overworld and auto attack sections, making this boss battle a lot more challenging as Shadow Jirachi is quite fast, flying around the cavern and at times even teleporting, making it hard to land your attacks. But luckily both Rui's Lucario and Michael's Jolteon would also be helping you in the auto attack sections with Aura Sphere and Thunderbolt attacks to try to hit it. Jirachi's overworld attacks would be Psychic, using it to hurl boulders from the cavern at you, Swift, shooting razor-sharp stars at you, which are impossible to evade, a powerful Flash Cannon attack where it bursts out a beam of light at you, and a charged Shadow Star, which is a new signature Shadow attack and essentially a Shadow version of its signature move, Doom Desire, that if you don't stop in time using action commands, the screen would flash white and you'd automatically would lose the battle. And as I just mentioned, you'd also once again have the cinematic action commands throughout the battle, which allow you to do more damage outside the traditional turn-based sections if you manage to hit the buttons in time. Both Jolteon and Lucario would also be involved in these action command sections, working alongside your Mummion and Drekion to help trap and defeat Shadow Jirachi. After working together to finally do so, you'd be able to snag it and shortly afterwards purify it at the relic stone in the catacombs. But before doing so, the game would cut to a quick cutscene between Odin and his granddaughter Twyla on Mount Battle as he flies down on Lodin and try to talk to her on the peak of this mountain, in which case she will reply, "Not you again, what does a girl have to do to get a little privacy around here?" Odin will then plead to Twyla and her humanity, saying he knows there is good in her. The child he raised was a loving one, and now that he is aware that the darkness within her was unlocked by the Chaos Crown, he is confident that her better half can prevail. Her better half would then appear, happy to see her grandfather pleading for his help, in which case the darker half, aka Lavrina, would resurface, saying pathetic. "I can't believe you fell for that. I have some pressing business to attend to, and you're clearly no match for me, old man. You never were, so I suggest you leave before things get ugly." And Odin will say he loves her and will never give up on her, in which case there would be a short cutscene of her sending out Shadow Lugia as it and Lodin would fly around in the air above the battlefield fighting. You'd even get to hit some action command buttons in this section, so you're not just watching the scene and you're actually involved in the fight. But Shadow Lugia ultimately wins, as its attacks are a lot more ruthless than Lodin's, and Twyla is able to distract Lodin, saying, "What happened to being almighty and omniscient? Did you not see this coming?" As her Absol and Retri have her grandfather Odin cornered at the edge of the battlefield ready to push him into the lava, distracting Lodin long enough for Shadow Lugia to finish it off, leaving Champion Odin defenseless as Twyla orders Cypher Goons to seize him. One of the grunts gives her Lodin's Master Ball. She looks at it, saying she can't believe she once wanted to own this Pokemon, rolling her eyes as she's unimpressed. You'd then cut back to the Fennec Catacombs,
where you'd have to find the relic stone to purify the recently snagged Shadow Jirachi, and once you do, it would trigger another cutscene where Jirachi would be purified, and Grateful would want to help both Michael and Rui out by granting them a wish. So Rui would make her big wish, the wish being for Zion to be fully restored with all of their memories and humanity intact, but not as a robot, but a real human being. Mamion and Drekion are shocked by this wish, and Michael asks if that's even possible, as they look at each other in joy, with tears in their eyes, as they hope it comes true and they're reunited with their master. Jirachi will then close its eyes, opening the third eye on its chest, as it floats up into the air, and the screen would then go white and a bunch of glowing orbs would float around the cavern, with the water glistening. Michael and Rui will then turn to look at Zion, who is fully healed, as there would be a close-up of Zion as he opens his eyes, but they're no longer mechanical looking like they've been in the past. Zion, now with his memories intact, will look down at his human hands in amazement as he can feel a big difference. And then Mamion and Drekion, ecstatic to see him back, would both then lunge into his arms sobbing, as tears would then proceed to roll down Zion's face as he holds them tight, saying that he missed them both so much and that his heart really does beat for them, as a callback to what he said in the previous chapter, saying he didn't have a heart, but if he did, it would beat for them. Michael and Rui are touched by this, and also happy to see Zion back, as they both join in, along with Lucario, for a group hug. But Michael will say ouch as his Jolteon tries to join in as well, and pokes him with its spikes, and they will all begin to laugh, including Jirachi, before Zion gets serious and says that they don't have a lot of time, they have to get to the top of Mount Battle, as he tells them he now remembers everything, and he even has all of Wes's memories prior to his creation back as well, meaning he knows exactly how to stop them. But thankfully, now that he's human, he doesn't have to worry about being reverted back to any kind of programming and being a device, which is exactly why Rui made that wish. Now himself once again, Zion says before they head to Mount Battle, he has something he needs to do. As you head to the outskirts stand, where he knows he'll find Wes, given they share the same memories and think similarly. Wes is there preparing to raid Mount Battle himself and battling his inner demons. Shocked to see Zion, who puts his hand on his shoulders and looks him dead in the eyes. A tear rolls down Zion's face as he knows exactly what Wes is going through, and Wes, seeing Zion is now human, appears like he's going to break down, but then backs up and says, "If you're here to stop me, you're too late. You know better than anyone we have to go through with this." And Zion replies, saying that he knows better than anyone that they don't. It's not too late to make amends. Everyone will forgive him over time. Rui will forgive him. But Wes isn't willing to talk about it any longer and challenges you to a double battle using his full team, which not only consists of the 3 legendary dogs, but a 4th legendary dog I created for my Legends Elemage project, in vein of the 4th Weather Genie in Pokemon Legends Arceus. This legendary dog being a poison type, but can also learn a variety of grass type moves. But more on that Pokemon later, as this project is coming up quite soon. Anyways, after defeating Wes, he will fall to his knees and look at his hands, trembling unsure what to do from here. Zion will slowly walk across the sand to him, as there would be a wide shot of the outskirts stand, with the sand blowing across the screen dramatically as Zion offers out his hand, saying let's save the Orre region for real this time. Wes pushes his hand away and says, "I know you think we are the same, but we are not. You started as nothing more than ones and zeros, made up of my memories. You didn't live through them like I did. You couldn't possibly understand," as he grabs a motorbike from the stand and zooms off towards Mount Battle, leaving Zion in the dust. You'd then head back to Mount Battle, where you'd battle even more Cypher Grunts, as well as have to battle all of the admins again with updated teams, starting with Musclehead Gonzap, including Mirror B, who will tell you he was dragged into the final phase by Twyla against his will and is quite upset as he has a performance he was really excited for tonight at his club. With Boone being the last one you battle, as he says he is genuinely happy to see Zion is okay, unaware of the fact he's now actually a human, but that he has no choice but to stop you as his family is in danger. Twyla has them, Namid, and Odin all in a device hanging over a lava pit, in order to keep both Boone and Chatham in line. After defeating Boone, Twyla above, now finally having the code to Robo Rayquaza from Chatham, will say, "You are no longer any use to me," meaning either are they, as she will hit the button to the device holding the mid and Boone's family, dropping them into the pit of lava. But before landing in the magma, Entei will jump across the screen, catching all of them on its back, as it's revealed to be Wes's. Twyla is shocked, as Wes appears behind her now that she's distracted, grabbing Zion's core out of her hand. She then says, "I see you made it out alive as well. What a pity, I guess I'll have to finish the job this time," as she throws out Shadow Lugia,
West throws out Raikou. There would be a cutscene of Shadow Lugia battling Raikou on Mount Battle with action commands for you to hit, with the battle being interrupted by Shadow Deoxys, who appears out of nowhere, crashing into Raikou, blasting it across the battlefield into a cliff as it goes to attack West, who is still holding Zion's core, causing him to drop the core as he goes to dodge the attack. The core then rolls across the metal platform as it appears like it's about to fall off into the magma, but before it does, Twyla will grab it, and then smiles saying, "I knew you'd come for this," as she holds up Zion's core. As I established in the previous chapters, Shadow Deoxys is drawn to and upset by it, much like the Shadow device that it activates, as they attract the Dark Contagion in all Shadow Pokémon, which is why Zion, being the Shadow Slayer, was attacked by and constantly battling all of the Shadow Warp Pokémon throughout the story. Shadow Deoxys will then lunge at Twyla, who doesn't move a muscle, as she will use the newly improved device Chatham and Namid were working on to successfully capture Shadow Deoxys. Namid watching from below, shouting "hey" as she's upset that she stole their tech. Twyla will then watch as Shadow Deoxys is constantly trying to change forms to break free from this device, confidently walking towards it, saying not to wear itself out after all, it will play a vital role in her plan, as she snags it with her snag machine. In which case everyone looks shocked, especially Wes, who then lets out Suicune to help fight, but Shadow Lugia will then fly back down, protecting Twyla. Zion will then tell Wes to leave it to him, as you then battle Twyla, starting out as a double battle between her Absol and Retri, as well as her Reshiram and Zekrom from the Fearon's Battle Frontier, as Frontier Brains have legendaries, and plenty of trainers from the Orre Region games have also used legendaries before. But after defeating Twyla in this fierce double battle, you'd have a boss battle against Shadow Lugia, which would function like the rest of the boss battles against Shadow Warp Pokemon. Anyways, this battle once again would consist of auto attacks and cinematic action commands outside of the turn-based style sections of battle, but of course you'd also have to avoid Shadow Lugia's powerful attacks in the overworld as it flies around out of reach of most of your auto attacks and swoops down to try to knock you off the platform into the magma below, which would obviously automatically end the battle, with its most powerful attack being a powerful Shadow Blast attack, its signature Shadow attack that is guaranteed to knock you off the platform if you don't manage to hit the action command button or dodge it in time. After defeating Shadow Lugia, there would be a cutscene where it appears to have a little more fight in it, as it starts to spread its wings as if it's about to attack again, but Michael then runs in front of you with his arms wide open, pleading to his former Pokemon to stop fighting them and to instead fight the darkness. Shadow Lugia slowly starts to move towards Michael as if it's about to attack him, but there would be a close-up of his face and then Lugia's as it seemingly recognizes him, and while still infected by the Shadow virus, leans its head into him as he pets it, saying he knew his Pokemon was still in there, as he then uses his snag machine to snag it back, kissing the snag ball after it's inside, saying "welcome home, my friend." Twyla will then say how disgusting, as she takes the core and makes her way to the control panel using the passcode she retrieved from Chatham to activate Robo Rayquaza, as Mount Battle starts to shake and everyone reacts as a giant door opens in the mountain and Robo Rayquaza slowly starts to rise on a mechanized platform towards Twyla, who enters the giant spacecraft and flies off into space. And for anyone wondering how she knows how to operate it, don't forget Twyla has been shown multiple times in both series and the Fearon saga to be excellent with technology, which only makes sense as she's a Lovrina clone. Anyways, just as Robo Rayquaza launches off into the sky, Michael will throw out his Shadow Lugia, asking if it has enough juice in it to help them get up into the ship, as Michael and Zion will climb on its back, followed by Wes, much to their surprise, but they don't question it as they know they'll need all the help they can get. Shadow Lugia will fly them into the base of Robo Rayquaza, undetected by Twyla, as they close off the area they entered from before exiting the atmosphere and entering into space, which would be shown in a cutscene of Robo Rayquaza in space, landing on the Totem Corporation's Pokeball-shaped space station, where Twyla would strut off the ship and towards the Shadow device to finish the final phase of her plan. But Zion, Wes, and Michael would all exit behind her, standing side by side, saying "not so fast." Twyla turns around, both surprised and annoyed they managed to get on board, as she throws out her newly snagged Shadow Deoxys to distract them as she makes her way towards the Shadow device with Zion's core. You then have a boss battle against Shadow Deoxys once more, this time constantly switching between all four of its forms, both in the overworld and traditional turn-based style sections of this battle, completely changing fighting styles and tactics every time, making for an unpredictable battle. And both Wes using Espeon and Umbreon, as well as Michael using Jolteon, would assist you in the battle, not only performing auto attacks on Shadow Deoxys in the overworld sections, but in most of the cinematic action command sections as well, as all three of the series protagonists would team up and fight side by side in this epic boss battle through the space station.
with the final action command having Drekion lure Shadow Deoxys into one of the sections of the space station so Mumyon can hit the button, having a metal door shut closing it in that section of the space station with Shadow Deoxys trapped inside. Then they would hit another button, launching that section off into space. Convinced Shadow Deoxys will no longer be a problem. Michael will be all excited afterwards, saying how awesome that was, giving Zion a big high five. As Zion, still not used to being human, says ouch and looks at his hand as it clearly hurt. Michael in the moment even tries to give Wes a high five immediately afterwards, but Wes, not amused, leaves him hanging, saying they all have to stop Twyla. As there would be a cutscene of you finding Twyla and the device, but it's too late. She's already put Zion's core inside of it and activated it. But the strange thing is, it's not pointing out the massive dome-like window of the space station towards the stars where it could attract a meteor, but rather right at the three protagonists. Michael immediately questions why this is, looks back to see Shadow Deoxys, who obviously escaped its pod. She then fires the device at them as they all duck for cover and the beam of dark energy hits her Shadow Deoxys behind them. She then says she told them all Shadow Deoxys was a part of her master plan. She then reveals she plans to use this device's control over the darkness not to attract more meteorites to destroy the world like they assumed, but to merge the darkness within her from the Chaos Crown with Shadow Deoxys, as it seems to work similarly to the Dark Contagion. As she then states that Shadow Deoxys has proven itself to be the perfect Pokemon and vessel with all of its various forms, and that she wants to merge with it so she can destroy the world herself and watch it burn. By the way, this darkness within her activated her memories and personality as Lavrina, as those are dormant inside her as a clone, and Lavrina was called truly terrifying in Gale of Darkness, but this is more so the results of the darkness from the Chaos Crown and the legendary Frostfire trapped within it. And since Frostfire being based on Surtur was obsessed with destruction, that's why Twyla is so hellbent on destroying the world, even though that was never Lavrina's memo. So Twyla would then use this machine to separate the dark entity from within her, leaving the real or good Twyla purified in the process, as Zion would rush to her side, and she'd be thankful to be free of the darkness. But this moment of happiness is all cut short, as the darkness that once consumed her is merged with Shadow Deoxys thanks to the device, which much to everyone's surprise unlocks a brand new form in the process, Ultimate Form. Deoxys' new ultimate form is not only much stronger than all of its previous forms, but a lot bigger, as it's been enhanced by the darkness within her originating from the Chaos Crown. So the final boss battle of the game would be against Shadow Deoxys in its colossal ultimate form, in this massive dome within the center of the space station. As once again, all three protagonists, Wes, Michael, and Zion, would team up for both the auto attack sections and action command sections of this battle, but the traditional turn-based style sections would be left to you, aka Zion. So I hope you have some of your Shadow Pokemon or powerful Shadow Warp Pokemon you've snagged handy for this fight, as they will be your best bet against this Titan, thanks to how Shadow moves work. Because Shadow moves are super effective against all other Pokemon except other Shadow Pokemon. So while your Shadow Warp Pokemon's signature Shadow moves wouldn't be super effective against Shadow Deoxys, at least its Shadow moves wouldn't be super effective against you, because otherwise Deoxys would blow through your team. And auto attacks will do next to nothing against Shadow Deoxys unless you manage to get close enough to hit its core, which is done by climbing the spiral staircase or platforms that wrap around the dome within the space station, but Deoxys will use its tentacles to knock you off back down to the ground level, which will do some serious fall damage depending on the height you fall from, so be careful. As usual, the best way to win this battle outside of the turn-based style sections would be by using the cinematic action commands, which would be epic as ever, with all three heroes fighting side by side against its final foe, with the final action command being Michael figuring out how the Shadow device works to try to separate Twyla from Shadow Deoxys once more, but it fails as Deoxys lashes out one of its tentacles, completely destroying the device before they can finish separating them, causing one last beam of dark energy to launch out of the device and glass dome into space, as the device is destroyed. All seems lost as Michael frantically asks what now, Wes and Zion being the same person in a sense, or at least sharing the same memories, exchange a glance as they know exactly what the other is thinking and what to do. As Wes says it's still a Shadow Pokemon, and Zion finishing his sentence says, meaning we can snag it, as he uses his snag machine one last time to create a snag ball as all of their Pokemon attack the already weakened Shadow Deoxys at the same time, with Mumyon and Drekion delivering the final blow, as Zion then throws the snag ball in a drawn out scene where it almost looks like it fails and is about to break free, but stops as it's successfully caught, and with it Twyla's darker half, as she's still fused with it. The three of them are ecstatic as the battle is finally over, and Wes even offers Michael a high five this time, which he contemplates but ends up accepting.
But the celebrations are cut short as the alarms within the space station go off, alerting them of an incoming asteroid that is in range of impact, which would completely destroy the space station if making contact. They all look out the dome into the infinite void of space to see the final dark beam sent out from the device as it was being destroyed has attracted a nearby meteorite with the dark contagion as it's hurtling towards the space station. Michael runs towards the command deck of the station saying the asteroid is humongous and large enough that it would not only destroy the space station without losing any real momentum, but is heading straight to Earth and would likely do some catastrophic damage there as well after making impact. Zion asks if there's any sort of defense measures on the station to stop the asteroid. Michael then turns to Purified Twyla, who has always been good with technology, but she says she's sorry she can't help, that was always more of a Lavrina thing. Wes, knowing all about the space station though, because he did lead Team Cypher after all, says that there's nothing on board to stop the asteroid, but if they can make it to Robo Rayquaza in time, there are weapons on there that at the very least would be able to knock it off its trajectory towards the station or Earth. But it's very dangerous as it requires getting extremely close and precise timing. Wes then presses a button telling Zion and Michael to get into this escape shuttle with Twyla and that he will send them all back down to Earth, that he will operate Robo Rayquaza and take care of it. Michael, concerned, asks if he's sure about this, and Wes then says yes. Zion, knowing how Wes thinks, says you don't have to do this, and Wes replies saying, I think we both know I do, as if it's kind of a way to seek retribution for his actions, as his initial plans leading Cypher are what led to this mess, even if it isn't how he intended for things to go, as once again, destruction was never really part of his plan, he was more so after power and control. Wes then gives all of his Pokeballs to Zion just in case, as Zion, Michael, and Purified Twyla all rush towards their shuttle as Wes makes his way back to Robo Rayquaza. But before parting ways, Wes screams across the large room to Zion, telling him to look after Rui and tell her he is sorry. Zion then says to tell her himself. The three of them make it out to the shuttle, where they launch back to Earth, and as they're descending from the darkness of space back to Earth, see what I did there? They watch Wes fly out on Robo Rayquaza towards the asteroid, first launching a powerful hyper beam-like blast at the crater, which does make it significantly smaller, but doesn't seem to really affect its momentum as it continues the hurtle towards the station and Earth. You can then see everyone below, Namid, Chatham, and Rui, who is able to see the shadow aura around this massive asteroid, all looking up at the dark sky as it appears to be getting closer and closer to the Earth's atmosphere. But Zion, Michael, and Twyla are all in shock as the asteroid is about to fly past Robo Rayquaza, as Wes then swirls his commands and jumps in front of it and lets out another hyper beam while heading straight into the center of the asteroid with no time to correct himself. There would then be a massive explosion as they make contact and Zion and Michael open their eyes as they are thrilled to see the asteroid has been destroyed with various little pieces of the wreckage floating around space, but are obviously sad to see that Robo Rayquaza is gone, as is Wes. But he did sacrifice himself for the greater good, which is exactly what Zion tells Rui and everyone else after they land back down on Earth. A tear runs down Rui's face as she obviously still cares about Wes and gives Zion a big hug. Zion then tells her that Wes had many regrets, but she was never one of them. She pauses as if to question how exactly he knows that, but remembers he has all of Wes's memories. She then puts her hands on Zion's cheek, saying that she always knew there was good in Wes, and that Zion is living proof of that. However, this tender moment is interrupted by Namid, who says ew, and everyone else laughs and celebrates their victory. But Michael then reminds them all that the Shadow virus is still running rampant through the Orre region, and there are still plenty of criminals who have already got their hands on snag machines due to Cypher's initial plans. And then Zion says that they will have to stop them together, as Mummion and Drekion both appear by his side. And everyone, including Boone and Chatham, all nod in agreement. And they'd all look up at the dark sky as the screen would fade to black and the credits would begin to roll. But during the credits, there would be a bunch of scenes showing what became of everyone afterwards, acting almost as an epilogue. First, Mirror B back in his club dancing with his Ludicolo, followed by a scene of Purified Twyla with her grandfather back in the Furin region, living a seemingly normal life together, with Loki seen in the background acting as their butler, clearing dirty dishes off the table, followed by a scene of Boone taking down criminals using Shadow Pokémon, as he's now fighting on the right side, helping to keep his family and the Orre region safe from Shadow Pokémon and the criminals who seek to control them. And then a scene of Namid and her father Chatham, as she gives him a sweet hug and says this doesn't mean she's forgiven him, that he has a long way to go before earning her trust back. He then tells her that she's right, and in fact he doesn't expect her to forgive him, but rather keep him and the Totem Corporation in line. She asks what he means by this, and he says that she is now officially the co-president of the Totem Corporation. Ecstatic, she lunges into his arms as he spins her around, and she keeps thanking him profusely, saying, "Thank you, Daddy, thank you, Daddy, thank you, Daddy, I won't let you down."
as he says, "I know you won't," looking into her eyes as a proud father, followed by a scene of Michael and his family at the grand opening of the new Pokemon HQ lab as it's been rebuilt after being destroyed by Twyla, as Michael will tell his little sister Jovi, who has a cameo along with her Minun and Plusle, to prepare the purified chamber as it's apparently been rebuilt. And she says, "Yes, Professor," implying Michael has replaced Professor Crane as the new professor of the Orre region, as Professor Crane was looking to retire after all the guilt he has been carrying after being manipulated by Cypher. You would even see Michael's Lugia in the background, who has once again been purified. The next scene would then be of now human Zion and Rui sitting together at the edge of the fountain in Phoenix City, as Mummion, Drekion, and her Lucario are splashing around in the fountain behind them. Rui's Sylveon would also join in, as Mummion uses his bandages to push Drekion closer to it as it blushes. Sylveon would then kiss Drekion on the cheek, and it appears to be love-struck before collapsing into the water out of pure joy. Zion jokes saying Drekion clearly has a type, being super effective, as a little reference to it having a crush on Grusha's Glaceon in the 3rd chapter. Rui laughs and then puts her hand over the top of Zion's hand as she asks how it feels to be human. Zion responds saying it's terrifying as he's never felt so vulnerable or fragile. With the sadness in her eyes, she asks if that's how Wes felt, saying yes, especially around you, as he holds her hand and she leans her head into his shoulder. As they both look up into the sky, grieving Wes as his silhouette can be seen in the sky above. The screen would then fade to black, but there would be one more cutscene inside Odin's chamber, showing the snag ball with Shadow Deoxys and Twyla's darker half inside of it, as a mysterious hand would then grab it and pull it out of the shot. This video will be taking a little break from the story, as I thought I'd share with you my full Orre Pokedex for the conceptual game Pokemon XD Descent of Darkness, and offer a little insight into why I picked some of the Pokemon I did for the region, each location, or character's Pokemon team. Now, since the majority of the Pokemon in the first game had to be a Shadow Pokemon snagged from other trainers' teams, I didn't really pay much attention to the Pokemon found in the 2 previous installments, as trainers can come from anywhere, so just because they have a Pokemon doesn't make it native to the region. But I did pay attention to the Pokemon found in the Pokespots found within Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, as those could be caught in the wild naturally, but there were only a handful of those. And since Pokemon Coliseum and Gale of Darkness were confined to Pokemon from generations 1 through 3 as they came out in the 3rd generation, obviously we have a lot more Pokemon to choose from, many of which I felt would fit right at home in the Arizona-inspired Orre region, and I even included my own Fakemon from my 3 Fakemon regions, the Luika region, the Firen region, and even my upcoming Zoni region. So without further ado, let's take a look at the full Orre Pokedex, starting with the Orre region starter Pokemon Eevee, with the 2 evolutions you start with in this game being my own evolutions, the Ghost-type Mummion and Dragon-type Drekion, both playing vital roles in the story as they assist the hero Zion on their adventures to snag the mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon, as well as the Flying-type evolution for my 3rd Fakemon region, the Zoni region, snagged by Zion later on in the story, but originally belonging to Namid's father, Chatham, as it was once his starter Pokemon before flying off to the Zoni region. And of course, if you have Eevee, you have to include the Pokemon mascot Pikachu and its evolutionary line. Although, it's important to note that its 3 Fakemon evolutions I gave it for each of my Fakemon regions would not be obtainable or present in this game, despite Mummion, Drekion, and Avion being present, as your starter Pokemon would be Mummion and Drekion only because they were prepared by Neo Team Cypher to assist the Shadow Slayer, and Avion as it's only available by snagging it as it flew in from the Zoni region to visit its previous trainer and is infected by the Shadow Virus. Next are some Pokemon that can be found all throughout the Orre region, many of which would be considered the early game or Route 1 mons of most Pokemon generations. Let's start with the early game normal types. While there would be a handful of these from various regions found throughout the Orre region, the most common would be the Zigzagoon and the Patrat line. The Zigzagoon line, as the Orre region has always been Gen 3 coded as it came out in that generation, and because raccoons are found throughout Arizona, in its forests, deserts, and even in its settlements raiding trash cans. Whereas I felt the Patrat line fit, as Unova being based in the United States would presumably be close to the Orre region, so I actually included a lot of Gen 5 Pokemon for this reason, as well as the fact that Unova had a lot of desert-esque Pokemon for its large desert area, so most of them fit anyways. And I felt this line particularly fit really well, as it resembles the prairie dogs found all throughout Arizona.
Since raccoons are primarily nocturnal, I felt the Zigzagoon line would be found more commonly at night, while the Patrat line would be easily spotted during the daytime. As for the regional birds, I felt both the Starly and Hoot Hoot line fit the bill. See what I did there? The Starly line, as it's inspired by the starling bird found throughout Arizona, and I feel like this line would be found all over the Orre region as well, and the Hoot Hoot line, as Arizona is home to various owl species, many of which capable of living in various climates and biomes, so naturally this line would be found all over as well, appearing more often at the nighttime, while the Starly line would appear more often during the daytime. Now for the regional bug, I felt the Whirlpool line, being another Gen 3 representative, would work best, as it offered a variety with its 2 evolutions, with the Beautifly line being found during the daytime, and the Dustox line being found later on in the evening and night. Speaking of nighttime, another bug type found all throughout the Orre region, but exclusively at night, would be the Chirping Cricketot line. I also felt the Orbeetle line fit the Orre region perfectly, as Arizona is home to various beetle species, not to mention the line alludes to aliens, which Arizona and the West in general are heavily associated with, so this line would be found all over, typically orbiting around the region's deserts and forests. Speaking of aliens, the first explorable area in Pokemon XD, Descent of Darkness, would be the Cosmic Crater, the crash site of the meteorite carrying the dark contagion that organically creates Shadow Pokémon in this game, inspired by a massive meteorite site in Arizona called Meteor Crater. Here you not only find the Orbeetle line, but other Cosmic-esque Pokemon, such as the Elgem and Clefairy lines, as well as Minior and Lunatone and Solrock. This crater is also where you'll have your first battle against Shadow Deoxys in its original form for the tutorial of the game. While we are here, I'd also like to explore more of the desert areas surrounding the Cosmic Crater, as the arid Orre region is primarily made up of desert, and that's what comes to most people's minds when they think of the Orre region or these games. Now, I obviously added a couple other biomes and locations to the region for some variety, but I also expanded upon the desert area, making it into 2 parts. The first being the lower half, which is the bulk of what was already featured in the previous games, housing iconic areas such as Orre Coliseum, the Outskirts Stand, Phoenix City, Railgam Tower, Pyrite Town, the SS Libra, Snag'em Hideout, and Cypher Lab. Here you'd find a variety of desert-inspired Pokemon such as the Sandshrew line, inspired by the Armadillo found down south of Arizona by the border, as well as the Cacnea line, as Arizona is not only full of cactus, but has several famous cactus gardens as well. The Numel line, and the Flygon line, all previously found in the Orre region for good reason, as well as newcomers from newer generations, such as the Scorbunny line, the Mandibuzz line, my original Hourglass Fakemon Sanduo, with its Pessimist and Optimist form, the Silicobra line, Orthworm and its new evolution I gave it, tunneling around in the desert sands, dune style, as well as the Lucario line, as is the ace Pokemon of one of the main characters from the first game, Rui, as I decided to give her a Pokemon companion in this game, and I felt Lucario was the perfect Pokemon because of its connection to Aura, because Rui is able to read the aura of people and Pokemon. So I felt that was fitting, and her, Riolu, and Lucario even have a special appearance, wearing tutus. But don't let the pink fool you, they are just as tough as their trainer. The Oasis Pokespot would also return, but there would be more than one Oasis in this vast desert now, all of which housing unique Pokemon such as the Surskit line, Phanpy line, Hoppip line, as all of these were found in the Oasis spot in Gale Darkness. But plenty of other Mons would be found here as well, now such as Maractus, the Marill line, and of course the Lotad line, as it would have to be in the Orre region for Mirror B to have so many Ludicolo. And if you're lucky, you may even spot the Dratini line in an Oasis. I also added a new area to this portion of the desert called the Excavation Site, where you team up with a new character and archaeologist, Rex, to round up and snag some fossil Pokemon as they are revived by the Shadow Virus, including my own fossil Pokemon from the Luika region. To the bottom half, there's also Pyrite Town and Pyrite Cave from the first games based on mining shafts, so I tried to incorporate Pokemon that I felt fit the mining setting, like the Charcoal line or my miner-inspired Toddler line from the Luika region, as the final stage of this line, Trezor, is one of the first Shadow Pokemon you battle in Descent of Darkness within the mining shaft. I also took inspiration from animals found in caves and the Cave Pokespot within Pokemon Gale of Darkness as well.
Next, we have the upper half of the Orre Desert, which I added to feature even more of its massive canyons and rock structures Arizona is known for. A lot of the same Pokemon found in the lower half of the desert would still be found here as well, with some new additions such as the Ekans line, inspired by Arizona's notorious rattlesnakes, the Bramblin line, inspired by Tumbleweed, the trusty Mudsdale line, the Lycanroc line, the Geodude line, the Onyx line, Skarmory, the Sudowoodo line, the Helioptile line, and since it is Arizona, other reptile lines like the Scraggy line, the Cyclizar line, and the Garchomp line, as well as a couple bugs like the Dweeble line and the Lokix line, including the new evolution I made for the line, Lokamech, as I felt it really fit the more futuristic, high-tech vibe of the region, being based on Kamen Rider's mecha. And the Kawadi and Cowboy-inspired Gauchiro line from my upcoming Zoni region, used by Neo Team Cypher member Cowboy Boone. This is also where you'd have a high-speed battle and race against Shadow Deoxys in its speed form, rushing through the desert around its various obstacles, such as its canyons and cacti. I added a new location in the form of Western-inspired Ghost Town to this area as well, known as Isola Town. A lot of rare Ghost-type Pokemon can also only be found in this area at nighttime, such as the Sinistea line and the Litwick line. And while not exclusive to this area, you can also find the Duskull line throughout the desert areas of the Orre region at nighttime. The Drifloon line can also be found all throughout the Orre region, especially at night, inspired by the hot air balloons and festivals, which are very popular in the Midwest. As well as the Limbu line, and my Kamara and Dreamin' Sleep Demon inspired line, both of which created for the Fearin region. And you'd even have a spooky showdown here against Shadow Gengar in the streets of this ghost town beneath the full moon. In the upper half of the desert, there's even a canyon gorge called Horsea Canyon, inspired by Horseshoe Canyon, with plenty of water-type Pokemon to capture, as well as the Revolt Dam, inspired by Arizona's famous reservoirs and dams, such as the Theodore Roosevelt and Grand Canyon dams, with even more water-type Pokemon to capture. It is even the spot where you'd battle Shadow Milotic, who makes use of the deep reservoir water. Next would be more of the Pokemon found primarily in or around the more populated areas of the Orre region, roaming the streets of its towns and cities, such as the Skitty line lurking in alleyways, alongside the Trubbish line, or Rattata and Ratcat scurrying out of the sewers or trash. You could even possibly see a Munchlax dumpster diving, or stealing food from a street vendor, or even the occasional Snorlax blocking traffic. The Poochyena and Nickit lines, while found in the wilderness, could also be found here scavenging for food. The Snubbull line and the Machamp line could be found in the streets picking fights with you or each other. The Abra line could be found almost anywhere in the region, including in its cities, where it would teleport all around. You'd also have the Revavroom line, zooming through the streets. So it goes without saying the streets of the Orre region's towns and cities would feel alive, and its wild Pokemon wouldn't be restricted to the wilderness. They say the grass is always greener on the other side, and in this case, it is true. So let's explore some of the more lush areas on the other side of the map. Starting with the peaceful Agot Forest from the first two games, filled with a variety of Pokemon of various different types I thought fit this area, or forest in general, but I did, however, look to some real forests or parks in Arizona for inspiration, trying to take the wildlife found there into account. But this peaceful forest is not so peaceful, as you have to stop a rampaging Shadow Slacking from destroying Agot Village. In the grasslands or prairie areas of the region, you'll find a variety of Pokemon of all different types, but mostly of the bug and grass type, as a lot of them are inspired by Arizona insects or flowers. Including the Vesplug and Sproutlet lines I created for the Fearin region, which have a symbiotic relationship sharing an electric charge instead of pollen, as one is a plug and the other is an outlet, as I felt their more high-tech appearances fit the future aesthetic of the Orre region. In the neighboring farmlands, you'd find plenty of farm animal Pokemon, as Arizona is a big farming community, of course. And this is where you'd battle Shadow Hatteran at sunset in the spooky corn maze. Here you'd also find a Quinny village based on Native American reservations, as there's a lot of those within Arizona, as it has a lot of deep history with Native American heritage. And I feel like the Orre games really didn't reference or play into that at all, so I thought I would. So here you'd find a lot of Native American inspired Pokemon, such as the Xatu line, the Bravery line,
and even my Spy Dream and Nightmare line from the Luika region, as they're based on dream catchers, as well as an African spider species, and Anansi from African folklore, who is associated with dreams, which is why I did the whole dream catcher thing, even though those aren't typically found in Africa, even though they do actually have their own dream catchers, but I digress. And outside of the dream catcher concept, there are plenty of spider species within Arizona, so it fits perfectly, I felt. And in the new Mega Metropolis I added to the region right above Aqueni Village, known as Neo Aqueni, and since the Orre region is known to have a future aesthetic in its locations and character designs, you'd even find plenty of lines like the Porygon line, the Magnemite line, the Voltorb line, and the Clink line in many of its more advanced cities, as well as my own Fakemon duo from the Fearon region, Combot and Medroid, with Combot patrolling the streets alongside Officer Jenny, and Medroid usually seen assisting Nurse Joy in Pokemon centers. Gale of Darkness hero Michael, who returns in this game, even uses a Combot throughout the story. This is also where you'd face off against Shadow Deoxys in its attack form as it's chasing you through the labs and to the rooftop of Totem Tower. To the northwest of the region, I added a snowy mountain, so I could include more ice types organically. Here you'll find Snow Bellow Slopes, which is a ski resort, inspired by many of the ski resorts found in Arizona, most of which of course using artificial snow, but regardless, you'd find plenty of ice type Pokemon here within this area, as well as a couple of my Fakemon lines. Including a counterpart for Absol I created known as Retri, the yin to its yang, both of which being used by antagonist Twyla in double battles. And you'd even team up with Grusha from the Paldea region to take. I also added a beach town and resort next to Gation Port, known as Celebes City. Along the beach you'd find the Executor line, the Sandygast line, the Krabby line, the Wingull line, and the Clamperl line. You'd also find its evolutions in the water or ocean waves alongside plenty of other water-type Pokemon, like the Sharpedo line circling the shores, schools of Luvdisc, Magikarp, or even the occasional Gyarados or Lapras, as well as the Jolescent line, as I felt it fit the Orre region's more tag-centric battles. And from Gation Port, you'd take a cargo boat filled with Cypher Goons to Citydark Isle, but out at sea you'd be caught in a rough sea storm, where Shadow Deoxys in its defense form will come crashing down, and you'd have a battle on this sinking ship against it. And after arriving on Citydark Isle, you'll find plenty of ruthless Dark-type Pokemon on the hunt along its barren beach, as well as Fire-type Pokemon around the island's volcano. And on this volcano, and in the Cypher lab found here, you'd battle a Berserk Shadow Cookatrix, which is once again a shadow version of one of my own Fakemon, Cookatrix from the Fearon region, which can also be found on the volcano as well.
If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to show your boy some love and hit that like button, leave a comment down below to let me know what you think, and most importantly, please subscribe to my channel so I can keep it growing. As most of you know by now, while the concepts and designs featured on my channel are all my own, I don't actually draw the artwork featured in my videos, as I have commissioned over 40 talented artists who I work with intimately throughout the creative process down to the tiniest of details, so I can take you on these exciting journeys through my imagination. So please make sure to go follow and support all of them as well. Their links will be provided down below in the description.